Megan, Carr and Cherish DeSantis seemed destined to become best friends. The girls were born just a day apart, attended the same school, clubs, and activities together, and their parents thought each of them had 2 daughters. Both of their families were quite wealthy. Megan's father owned and managed a company specializing in drilling water wells. It had been a family business since the 1940s, bringing in around $2 million annually. However, by 1992, Megan's parents had divorced, and she lived with her mom, Shirley. As for Cherish's father, he was a well-known tobacco auctioneer in town and nationwide for over 30 years. While such auctions are not as common now, back then, it was a thriving business. In the spring of 1992, 16-year-old Megan and Cherish were popular students at Thomasville High School in Georgia. Their families made sure their daughters behaved appropriately, although there was never a need for concern. The girls never caused trouble, excelled in their studies, and all their activities were within the bounds of propriety. Even during vacations, they looked forward to peaceful beach getaways rather than raucous parties. Thursday, March 26, 1992, marked the last day before spring break. After that, students could forget about school until April 6th. Megan and Cherish were eager to squeeze in some beach time. Not in Thomasville, of course, but in Florida, less than 60 kilometers away. For Thomasville students, crossing the border to visit the beaches of Tallahassee was a common practice. It took about 2 hours and the trip was quite enjoyable. The young women preferred a single beach that wasn't overrun by tourists. It was called Unraveled Point, a picturesque 13-kilometer shoreline, popular for birdwatching, wildlife, and yes, alligators, hence its name. Overall, it was a wonderful spot to relax under the sun and take a swim. That was Megan and Cherish's plan. Therefore, at 10 o'clock on Friday morning, the girls packed their swimsuits, towels, and, hopping into Megan's new Honda, headed for Florida, planning to spend the entire day at the beach. They intended to return home that same evening. Some of their friends were supposed to join them, but at the last moment, some had second thoughts or urgent matters came up. The girls arrived at Alligator Point Beach around noon. Megan parked the car, they grabbed their towels, changed into their bikinis, and turned on the rock station on the boombox. After wandering leisurely along the beach for a few hours, a married couple noticed the girls and, seeing that they were resting in a somewhat unusual pose, one girl lying on top of the other, decided not to disturb them. The couple veered wide around them to avoid causing any disturbance. However, on their way back, they realized that the girls hadn't moved at all. Even as they openly stared at them for minutes, the girls remained still. The man asked his wife to stay put while he approached them closer. He saw blood and shouted to his wife that the girls appeared to be dead and they needed to call the police. Alligator Point Beach was a family-friendly beach where visitors enjoyed walks and picnics. The police were aware that there had never been attacks on women at this beach. Therefore, the arriving officers were also horrified by what had happened. The ongoing contrast of the radio continuing to play rock music added to the chilling atmosphere of the murder scene juxtaposed against the carefree beach setting. The officers found the girls' identification and conducted a preliminary identification. They were 16-year-old Megan and Cherish. In addition to their documents, all their belongings were nearby: wallets, cash, Megan's car keys, beach bags, and towels. The girls were in bikinis, so the police ruled out robbery or violence against them as motives. Megan had a towel draped over her head soaked in her blood. Cherish lay on Megan with a head wound as well. As later determined by the medical examiner, each girl had been shot twice in the head from close range with a .38 caliber firearm. There was a lot of blood around the bodies. Besides the bullet holes, there were no other injuries on the victims, as if they had been caught off guard and didn't fight for their lives. Therefore, reluctantly, the police had to consider whether this was someone the girls knew. It seemed unlikely that a stranger could have approached so closely without the victims screaming or attempting to escape. And who could have known they would be relaxing in this isolated part of the beach? It appeared that the attack was planned, and someone had been monitoring them and traveled all the way from home. But who would want to kill 2 schoolgirls? The police began interviewing possible witnesses among local residents and regular beachgoers because although it was a remote part of the beach, families were nearby and cars were parked in the lot. They should have heard gunshots or the victims' cries. One regular beachgoer indeed heard sounds around 12:30 that he mistook for fireworks. Now, of course, it was evident he had heard 4 gunshots. Shortly afterward, a car passed by him that he hadn't seen there before. It was a long blue car resembling a Chevrolet Nova or something similar. Officers also went to the parking lot where Megan's car was parked and noticed something strange. There were plenty of open parking spots, but someone had blocked Megan's car in such a way that she couldn't leave. It wasn't a Chevrolet, but the car turned out to be blue. Approaching, the officers saw a man inside with a camera on his lap. When asked what he was doing there, the man explained that he had been photographing birds in the area all day. He had seen people, of course, but not teenage girls dancing on the beach. He rather aggressively stated that he had no interest in watching girls dance on the beach. Curiously, who mentioned anything about dancing on the beach? The man was taken in for questioning and a weapon was found in his trunk. The police were already rubbing their hands, thinking they had quickly solved the case. During questioning, the man admitted he had seen the girls but denied any involvement in the murders, claiming they were alive when he passed by them on the beach. He even underwent a polygraph test. The gun found in his trunk turned out to be a completely different caliber than the murder weapon, so the suspect was released. The bartender from the establishment near the beach where the girls died recalled a strange incident that occurred on the day of the murders involving an unusual visitor. He entered as soon as the establishment opened, ordered a Bloody Mary cocktail, but the bartender wasn't quite ready for service due to a delay, so she told the man the drink would be on the house. However, he insisted on paying. This alone wouldn't have been odd, except for his words. "You'd better take this money because it's the first and last time I'll come in here." Whether he meant to offend her or not, he stayed in the bar for 40 minutes and left shortly before the presumed time of Megan and Cherish's murders. Meanwhile, it was getting dark, approaching dinner time, when Megan and Cherish were expected home, but they hadn't returned. Megan's mother called Cherish's parents to see if her daughter was with them, but they hadn't seen her either. The woman was a bit worried, but she knew the girls were responsible and assumed they were just running a bit late. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The Florida police notified their colleagues in Thomasville about what had happened and asked them to inform the families of the victims. How can anyone prepare someone for the news that their loved one will never come home again? It was a tragedy for both families. They felt as though they had lost two daughters. Although the officers tried to be as tactful as possible, they needed to ask several questions. The girls' relatives explained that they spent almost all their time together, either at Megan's house or Cherish's. The only other person they spent a lot of time with was Alex, Cherish's boyfriend. The families insisted that Alex had nothing to do with the murders, but everyone was considered a suspect until ruled out by the police. Moreover, they were troubled by how the killer got so close to the girls. This meant they didn't see him as a threat. Therefore, suspicion fell on Alex next. But he seemed genuinely grieving, just like everyone else, unable to believe they were gone. The police were convinced that Alex must have known where the girls would be hanging out. He replied that he could have found out if he wanted to, but they never discussed it. Additionally, when Megan and Cherish went to the beach, he was at work in the factory. His colleagues indeed confirmed the young man's alibi, so the police left Alex alone and allowed him to mourn the loss of his girlfriend and her friend. The police had no solid leads and disclosed almost nothing to the public. Therefore, all sorts of wild rumors circulated about the motive for the murders. Some speculated that the girls were random victims of drug smuggling, with smugglers landing on the beach and killing unwanted witnesses. However, there was no evidence of any boat landing on the beach. Others recalled that the beach used to be a nudist beach and suggested the girls might have been targeted for occasionally sunbathing topless there. But Megan and Cherish were in bikinis, so this theory didn't make sense. The most plausible theory was that someone was upset about Cherish's father's tobacco business, perhaps due to a failed deal, and took out their anger on his daughter. However, the police couldn't find any evidence to support this theory. Time passed, and the police couldn't make progress. There was neither a motive nor evidence to find the culprit. Even experienced police officers didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, societal pressure was mounting. The only lead that demanded substantial police resources was the blue Chevrolet Nova. Police spoke with all owners of similar blue cars in the state of Florida. In Georgia, they couldn't do this because in 1992, the state lacked a database of car colors. Officers went door to door, interviewing car owners. Several times they felt they were onto something, such as when they discovered that an owner of a similar model lived across the street from one of the girls, or when they found a former convict acting suspiciously at the crime scene. But all these promising leads didn't amount to anything. Suddenly, a woman called the sheriff's office in Tallahassee. She claimed to know who shot the girls because she was on the beach when it happened. This call was a godsend for the police, giving them renewed hope that the case would be solved. She said the man's name was Sam Haynes, and he lived near the beach. However, when asked to identify herself, she hung up. She had called from a payphone, so tracing her location was impossible. Although the police desperately wanted to find her, as she confessed to being involved in the crime, they couldn't locate her. It turned out that despite Sam living near the beach, he was actually working at a construction site in Atlanta, Georgia, 6 hours away from the crime scene. Investigators suspected Sam might have followed the girls when they drove that day. Upon learning he was being sought, Sam contacted the police himself. He claimed he was at work in Atlanta on March 27th and insisted someone was lying about him. Sam suspected it was Linda, his ex-wife's sister. As it turned out, Sam was not mistaken. Linda accused her former brother-in-law of the high-profile murder of the two girls as revenge for mistreatment of her sister. It's remarkable she took this step, considering she could have been arrested herself. In any case, detectives spent a lot of time in vain. If it weren't for the next crucial event, they wouldn't have solved the case no matter how hard they worked. On Friday, May 15th at 10 a.m., the sheriff's office received another call. It was a resident of Tallahassee claiming to know who killed Megan and Cherish. The killer was her ex-boyfriend, Robert Neil Rodriguez. This sounded familiar to the investigators, who had lost hope of it being anything other than another scorned ex. So they asked her why she thought he had killed someone. But the woman said he confessed himself. Robert had called her the previous evening and told her everything, convincing her he was serious. He begged her to wait until the next morning to call the police. She kept her promise. One detective thought the man's name sounded vaguely familiar and reviewed the list of people involved in the case. Robert's name was indeed on it because he owned a blue car, though not a Chevrolet Nova, but a 1979 Plymouth Volare, a model very similar to the Chevrolet. The caller couldn't provide any more information, particularly about Robert's current location, but she knew he planned to leave town and was armed. She added that he had previously lived with his mother in Tallahassee, about an hour's drive from Alligator Point Beach. Robert's neighbors confirmed he had moved out of the apartment on May 2nd or 3rd. During the search of his apartment, books on death and other items suggesting a specific, possibly depressed state of mind were found, but no weapon. The police stations around the country were informed of the new suspect's description. Meanwhile, the investigators tried to recall what Robert had told them that caused them to strike his name from the suspect list. But as they began to delve into his past, they were horrified to realize that he was a former police officer from Portland, Oregon. He served in the police force for 2 years, from 1975 to 1977. The officers were shocked because the murderer who committed such a terrible crime could have been one of them. When they approached him about his blue car, he immediately claimed to be a former police officer himself and offered to undergo a polygraph test. But the police stated that it was just a routine check and left him alone. As it turned out, they were wrong. Incredibly, just 8 hours after the woman's call at 6 p.m., the police phone rang again. This time, it was a man introducing himself as Robert Neil Rodriguez. Being a former police officer, he immediately provided his driver's license number to prove it was really him. Then Robert convinced the officer that he was the one who committed the murder. He simply confessed. Robert provided the police with information known only to the killer. For example, the fact that Megan had a towel on her face. He even said he was calling from a payphone on the road in New Mexico, heading to the Grand Canyon National Park, driving his Plymouth. Robert's voice sounded so detached and subdued that detectives feared he might do something foolish. Detectives asked him to surrender to help him, but Robert said it was too late for him and he wouldn't go to prison. He feared that as a former police officer, he would have a hard time in prison. Detectives hurried to find the man, but were also afraid to show his photo in the news. They feared that if Robert's photo appeared in the news, he might do something irreversible, or someone else might take matters into their own hands. The next morning, on May 16th in New Mexico along the route to the Grand Canyon National Park, a blue Plymouth was found on the highway. The license plates on the car were from Utah, but when they checked them, it turned out they had been stolen on May 8th from a parking lot in Utah. The car was just parked on the highway. Inside sat a man who matched the description of Robert Rodriguez. He looked as though he had lost consciousness. A vial with a white substance dangled from a leather lace around his neck, and a handwritten note lay on the dashboard. The note was addressed to anyone who found the man. In it, Robert, confirming it was indeed him, wrote that he had taken cyanide and under no circumstances should anyone try to revive him with artificial respiration, as the rescuer might get poisoned themselves. On the passenger seat was a notebook, where Robert explained in more detail that he had consumed cyanide mixed with scotch for the parents of Megan and Cherish and to avoid imprisonment. There was a gun in the car, but it was a .22 caliber, not the one used to fire the deadly bullets. However, the most intriguing part was that according to Robert's final promise, the Florida police should expect a letter from him detailing how and why he killed the girls. When the parents of the girls heard the news, they were shocked and puzzled. Megan's father wondered, could they have hired a former police officer as a hitman? He couldn't fathom the idea that a stranger could shoot his daughter just like that. He believed it must have been a professional killer. Meanwhile, Cherish's mother, upon learning about the discoveries during the search of Robert Rodriguez's home, wondered if he was a serial killer who hated women. If he was so obsessed with killings, shouldn't he have killed more than 2 people by his age? Of course, at that time, she didn't know how close to the truth she was. And then, on May 18th, the first letter from Robert surfaced. It didn't go to the police, but to a newspaper. In it, he disclosed where the police should look for his body because initially Robert had intended to reach the canyon. He also claimed that he would be sought in connection with 3 committed murders. Incredibly, he admitted that the police themselves wouldn't have been able to link him to 3 murders, but he simply couldn't stay silent. In 1984, he killed another innocent girl, Valerie Hunt. That his 3rd victim was Valerie Hunt. He killed her in 1984, and the police will receive all the details about the murders by mail. Valerie was a 22-year-old student from Tallahassee. Her body was found in September of that same year near the pond. The police initially treated the case as a disappearance, possibly suspecting she had run away, but everyone who knew her didn't believe she would willingly disappear. Her boyfriend reported her disappearance when her boss called to say she hadn't shown up for work, although she was always reliable. Like Megan and Cherish, Valerie went to the pond to swim and sunbathe. She frequented the area often, was a strong swimmer, and it was incredible that she drowned. The cause of her death was undetermined because her body was heavily decomposed. Now, finally, it became clear that she was Robert Rodriguez's first victim. On the 19th, finally, a letter arrived at the police, after which Robert's messages were received by the families of all his victims, his friends, and former girlfriends with whom he had good relationships. The police didn't disclose the details of the message until they had verified every word from the man. They asked the families of the girls to do the same, but Megan's father decided differently. He saw both letters, Megan and Cherish's families, and said they were practically identical, with no hint of an apology in either. Robert revealed the details of how he committed the crime, although Megan's father would have preferred him not to. On March 27th, around noon, Robert entered a cafe near Alligator Point Beach. It was he who ordered a Bloody Mary cocktail and insisted on paying for it. The bartender confirmed this when she saw his picture. He left the establishment around 1 p.m. and headed to the beach. Witnesses who found the bodies passed Megan and Cherish at 1:45, and they were already dead. That is, after leaving the bar, he immediately went to the beach where he saw the girls and killed them. He was haunted by a fantasy in which he raped, beat, and killed a girl. These thoughts had plagued him for a long time, and he couldn't find an explanation or justification for this obsession. And though he dreamed of violence, he assured the police and the girls' families that he hadn't done anything like that to Valerie, Megan, or Cherish. After killing Valerie, he told himself he could live a normal life, and that if he did it again, he would kill himself. And then, when he came across Megan and Cherish, he couldn't hold back. They did nothing to provoke him. He had never met them before, but chose them because they were young, attractive, and vacationing in a remote area. It was all over in seconds. He shot Megan first. Cherish began to scream and back away. Then he shot her. Megan had a towel in her hand and it fell over her head when he shot. Then he shot each one more time to make sure they were dead before fleeing. All the letters were written matter-of-factly, and there was practically no emotion in them. It must have been very difficult to read them. Megan's mom again raised the question that worried everyone. How could he harbor this passion for murder for 8 long years before killing again? Megan's father speculated that Robert became engrossed in religion, then lost faith again, and therefore killed again. But investigators noticed another interesting pattern. He divorced shortly before Valerie's murder in 1984. And he had just broken up with his girlfriend before Megan and Cherish's murders. One of his church friends said he sometimes got angry about relationships. Maybe that's how he vented his anger. And his mother died on Easter morning in 1992, and since he no longer had any truly close people, he decided to confess everything. The pastor of his church said Robert was struggling internally. His loving and caring nature fought against the evil inside him. He stuttered about suicide at least twice, and he was taking medication previously used to treat depression, but its effect was linked to aggressive behavior and thoughts of harming himself. When people gathered for service on Sunday, May 17th, and didn't see Robert, they couldn't believe what they had learned about him. They called him Bob, sincerely loved him, helped others, and he wasn't the person they read about in the news. One woman said it was so much like him, warning that he had taken cyanide. Another admitted she wouldn't be able to read news about criminals and judge them as before because she knew one personally. She will think about the people who loved this man, because they exist, and she is one of them. It's clear that Robert didn't understand the reason behind his obsession and didn't want to harm innocent strangers. It's unfortunate that he couldn't overcome his inner demons and stop himself before taking the lives of 3 innocent individuals, Valerie Hunt, Megan Carr, and Cherish DeSantis, and breaking the hearts of both their loved ones and his own. In 1989, the industrial growth in the American state of Indiana allowed certain businesses to reach unprecedented heights, with businessmen reaping the benefits. John Parker was one of them. John started working at a very young age. As a teenager, he took a job at a restaurant clearing dishes from tables. However, this was not enough for the ambitious young man, and he ventured into selling vacuum cleaners. Going door-to-door selling vacuum cleaners doesn't usually earn much. Even his own family mocked John's choice. The laughter stopped when, just a few months later, the 19-year-old broke all sales records. It seemed like he went from nothing to a super successful person overnight, but that wasn't the case. John worked tirelessly for his goals, putting in 12 to 16 hours a day. Despite his hard work, he wasn't selfish and willingly shared his knowledge and experience to inspire colleagues to excel in their work. Confident and very charismatic, the young man moved to Michigan, where he opened his own vacuum cleaner sales center. The wave of success brought 20-year-old Judy Hicks to his shore. Judy was self-assured and assertive, but she had to be. Unlike John, who grew up in a middle-class family, Judy knew poverty. She married very young and became a mother of 2 children, Christina and Danny. However, her married life didn't work out, and after the divorce, to make ends meet and take care of her children, she also decided to start selling vacuum cleaners. John helped her, first as a colleague, then as a lover. The closer they became, the more successful the business developed. Judy became his right-hand woman. Every time he gave a speech, John started by saying he wouldn't have achieved anything without Judy. The couple married at the end of 1992 and opened a training center for other sales professionals, J&J Parker Industries. By the age of 30, John became a millionaire, and his family grew with 2 more daughters, Tiffany and Erica. Christina and Danny also called John their dad, spent a lot of time at the office with their parents, and it was impossible to tell that John wasn't the biological father of the older children. The family led a deliberately luxurious lifestyle. This was one of John's philosophies, to radiate success so that his employees would also strive for success. He was an idol of the youth of that generation. However, after 10 years of marriage, many things changed. John, once a cheerful and content man, turned into a bundle of nerves. However, not without reason. His wife cheated on him with their colleague. John became suspicious and installed several surveillance cameras at work, which confirmed his wife's affair. It was a severe blow to his ego. He started drinking. Judy begged him to hand over the incriminating video, but John refused. It would give him a significant advantage in divorce proceedings. However, he had no intention of divorcing. As he jokingly told a friend, it's cheaper to keep her, so John decided to take his wife as far away from her lover as possible. The family returned to Indiana and settled in the prestigious neighborhood of Crown Point. John opened an office in Merrillville, Indiana, and disbanded the office staff in Michigan. He brought with him only his most loyal employees, including his trusted confidant, Ben. John brought Ben from Michigan and began training him in everything so that when he decided to step back from business, it would continue to thrive. Together, they built a business empire and seemed to be living better than they could have ever imagined. However, on Thursday, April 17, 2003, The emergency services received 2 calls reporting an armed attack in the warehouse district where John Parker's company office was located. The calls came from John's wife, Judy Parker, and his manager, Ben. When the police arrived, they first searched the entire area, including dumpsters and rooftops, in case the suspect was hiding somewhere. Finding no one, they returned to the crime scene and to John Parker, as he turned out to be the victim. His car was parked in front of the office, and he was found lying on the ground with a single bullet hole in the back of his head. The gunshot wound was fatal. A casing from a .25 caliber semi-automatic pistol was found nearby the body. What surprised investigators was that a second identical casing was found some distance away from the victim. The man's wallet was missing from his pocket, and at first glance, it appeared to be a botched robbery. While the medical examiner took the body for autopsy, investigators had to find out from Ben and Judy what they had seen. In Judy's account, she behaved unusually calmly, which the detectives attributed to shock. She explained that in the evening, she and her husband had dinner at a local restaurant while their 4 children stayed home watching a movie. One of their younger daughters, Tiffany, had been misbehaving at school, and the couple wanted to discuss discipline for her. The next day was the start of spring break, so it was clear the girl would be spending all her days at home. At some point, their daughter Christina called and said that Tiffany had left her homework in the office, so the couple stopped by to pick it up. While John exchanged a few words with Ben, Judy retrieved their daughter's work and went back to the car. The couple intended to pass some leftover food from the restaurant to Ben. John walked over to the car and opened the rear passenger door behind the driver's seat. Judy saw her husband open the car door, and almost immediately 2 loud bangs rang out. She ducked down, and when she looked up, she saw John fall, and a person dressed all in black quickly running away from the car. It was dark, and she couldn't make out who it was. This story puzzled the detectives. Typically, a robber rarely shoots the victim immediately. Usually, there's a short conversation that escalates before it comes to gunfire, but not this time. They suspected it wasn't a botched robbery. Furthermore, besides the wallet, John was wearing a Rolex watch and other valuable men's jewelry. Judy mentioned that her husband, as a businessman, often had conflicts with other people. He was very demanding of himself and his colleagues. About 3 weeks before the murder, he had a heated argument with a former employee right in the office parking lot. The men exchanged harsh words, and police intervention was required to separate them. Company manager Ben confirmed that such an argument took place. John accused the former employee of not returning all the equipment after his departure. The employee, in turn, believed that he hadn't received all the owed payment. However, everything was resolved. The employee returned the equipment and received the appropriate payment. This turned out to be a dead-end lead that didn't lead anywhere. John was killed on a Thursday evening. However, the previous Monday, a school officer from Crown Point contacted the Merrillville police. He learned about the murder from the news and wanted to share important information. For about 6 months, he had known about a conspiracy to murder John Parker involving 3 teenagers. 2 of them were caught with a large sum of cash. The school became suspicious of how 15-year-old students had such a large sum of money, so they questioned them. Although they were interviewed separately, their stories completely matched. They told of their classmate Danny, John Parker's stepson, paying them to kill his stepfather. The seized money was only part of the sum. In reality, they received several $1,000s. However, they deceived Danny, having no intention of even coming close to his stepfather. Since the boys had no intention of committing murder, the school simply confiscated the money and did not pursue the matter further. They didn't even contact Danny's parents or interview him about the incident. Yet, this was an opportunity to learn more about the issues clearly evident in the family. Now, 6 months later, John was dead, murdered, and the police had to determine whether his stepson could be involved. Investigators began interviewing family members, friends, and neighbors of John. The overall impression was that he was an excellent boss and friend, well-liked despite being quite strict and having a volatile temper. John worked very hard but spent every evening with his family. However, it became increasingly difficult for him to keep track of his teenage children, 17-year-old Christina and 15-year-old Danny. Little Christina was simply a wonderful child, but when her mother married John and she was plunged into a world of newfound financial possibilities, all the girl wanted to do was party, enjoy life, and throw parties in their new big house. Soon, she started getting into trouble. Her younger brother Danny wasn't far behind. He was generally more spirited and restless than his sister, and his antics were accordingly mischievous. One evening, without permission and without a driver's license, he took his father's SUV and knocked over mailboxes of neighbors. After that, John had to go around to all of them and negotiate so they wouldn't report his stepson's actions to the police. It's worth noting that John himself grew up in a family with very strict rules and tried to impose similar rules on his family so that the older children wouldn't get into trouble with the law. Of course, the teenagers didn't like this and rebelled. And what about Judy? She preferred to be a friend rather than a mother to Christina and Danny. The parents seemed to be clearly divided into good and bad cops. What was most horrifying was that the younger girls saw the atmosphere in the house unfold and also didn't listen. After learning about the family situation, investigators hurried even more to find the two classmates of Danny and interview him himself. Danny did not deny conflicts with his stepfather, who tried to raise him as best he could. He admitted to giving money to his classmates, but not to kill John, just to scare and beat him up. And he had the money simply because he had been saving it for some time. Danny was still detained, and detectives had to find out if two teenagers accidentally killed John while trying to scare him. It turned out that one of the boys was in prison on the day of the murder, and the other lived in Las Vegas with his grandmother. Detectives went to Vegas and spoke with the teenager. He insisted that Danny had tried to persuade someone to actually kill his stepfather. But he and his friend tricked Danny and took the money without intending to commit murder. Police confirmed that the boy was in Vegas on April 17th, so this turned out to be another dead end. Danny was released home. Meanwhile, John's farewell took place. The man himself liked to repeat that people would forget your name, forget what you said, but they would not forget the feelings you evoked in them. At his funeral, everyone remembered what a wonderful person he was and how positively he influenced those around him. But someone directly stated that the worst part wasn't that John lay in a coffin, but that the person responsible for his death was probably in the same building with them. It was an unpleasant, oppressive feeling shared by everyone. But a week later, the image of the perfect family took another hit when a colleague of John's revealed a new lead, this time involving his stepdaughter, 17-year-old Christina. An employee of J&J Parker Industries disclosed that Christina, who also worked in her parents' company, approached him to find a hitman to kill her stepfather. For her troubles, she gave him $100 and handed over an additional $500 as a down payment for the hitman. Incredibly, this was another plot to kill John, which ended with Christina being deceived once again. However, suspicion now fell not only on Danny, but also on Christina. The girl denied everything, claiming she simply complained to her colleague about her stepfather, and he misunderstood her. Without details from Christina regarding the money exchange, investigators again hit a dead end. Was this a coincidence? Or had the teenagers conspired and were hiding a much darker plan? Several weeks later, a month after John Parker's murder, the police stumbled upon another lead leading to Christina's classmates. Under pressure, they confessed to selling a weapon to Christina that was used for shooting practice on a family farm. Officers found a tree with bullet marks on the farm, and on the ground, they discovered casings. Ballistics analysis confirmed that the casings matched those found at the crime scene. Now the police could link Christina to the purchase of the weapon, but the girl simply denied everything. And since the police didn't have the murder weapon in hand, and Christina had an alibi, she was watching a movie at home with her younger sisters, they couldn't prove that she killed John. So who pulled the trigger? The circle narrowed around family members, but for the prosecutor it wasn't enough. There was only a conspiracy, but no weapon, and no person to pin it on. Meanwhile, without John, his family and business gradually fell apart. Judy spent all her time with her new boyfriend Ben, John's right-hand man. The children were forced to take care of themselves, cooking and cleaning the house. This spoke volumes because after a tragedy, a parent instinctively seeks to spend more time with their children. Judy did just the opposite, indicating she wasn't truly attached to her husband or children. The business also declined, and Judy and the children struggled financially. Judy was supposed to receive $1 million from 2 of John's insurance policies, but because the investigation was ongoing, the insurance company refused to pay her. Judy and Ben moved with the younger girls to Michigan. Danny and his biological father went to Arizona, where the boy found work on a construction site. Christina, expecting her first child, stayed in Indiana with her boyfriend Eric. Only John's close friends and family continued to push for the investigation to continue, which it did without ceasing. In 2007, 4 years after John's murder, a detective from the narcotics department contacted one of the investigators on the case. He informed them that Christina's husband, Eric Grabsky, was involved in a drug-related investigation, and there was already a warrant out for his arrest. Detectives seized the opportunity to glean new information about the old case. They speculated that the hope of a deal with the prosecution would loosen Eric's tongue, and they were not wrong. Eric knew who killed John. The triggerman turned out to be Christina's younger brother, Danny. The question was whether Christina would confirm her husband's words. Eric called her and she agreed to come to the station. She stated that her stepbrother Danny had killed her stepfather. However, initially she tried to downplay her role, minimizing her involvement in the case. But investigators had already determined that she purchased the weapon, and it was she who called her parents about her sister's homework, even though school holidays, including Easter, were starting the next day, so there was no rush to collect Tiffany's homework. Therefore, detectives knew that Christina played an active role in the murder. They pressured her, and she confessed that she knew about all the conspiracies to kill John. She, her brother, and her mother had spent over a year trying to find someone willing to kill John, spending several $1,000s on their search. But after multiple unsuccessful attempts with incompetent contractors, they decided that Danny would do it. Detectives flew to Arizona, where Danny lived and worked. When an investigator approached him and mentioned being from Merrillville, Danny visibly softened. The detective asked, "Do you know why I'm here?" To which Danny replied, "I'm ready to tell everything." It was clear that this weighed heavily on him, and he regretted what had happened. Here's what he revealed. The murder of John was Judy's plan. She constantly told the children that she couldn't live with John anymore, that he mistreated her and was abusive. However, when Danny was asked if he ever witnessed such behavior towards his mother, he couldn't recall anything of the sort. Moreover, the police never responded to the family's address. Also, the mother promised the older children that life would be much better without John. They would have money and no control from a strict stepfather who demanded that the children study well and behave properly. Initially, Judy attempted to poison her husband personally, but she failed. Then she and the children began looking for someone willing to carry out this job for money. However, finding a killer and buying a weapon required money. To secretly obtain such large sums from her husband, Judy forged company checks. She stole $7,500 and John was about to find out about it. Ultimately, Judy decided they would do everything themselves. She devised a plan in which all three would have alibis. The mother decided her 15-year-old son, Danny, would commit the murder. Christina's role was to call and lure John to the office. Christina gave Danny the keys to her car, even though he didn't even have a driver's license yet. The accomplices took a huge risk, and at any moment, things could have gone awry. Nevertheless, the teenager climbed out of his bedroom window to avoid being noticed by his younger sisters, got in the car, drove to the office, and waited. He saw the parents arrive, hid behind a dumpster, and waited for an opportunity to shoot. When John approached the car and opened the door, Danny ran up and fired. The gun accidentally fired a second time when he tried to reach for the man's wallet, hence the second shell casing being far from the body. This clarified one of the mysteries that had been troubling the investigators. Danny then fled, got into the car, and quickly returned home, where Christina awaited with a bag into which he placed his clothes, the weapon, and the wallet. He took a shower, and they didn't discuss it further. Christina later handed the bag to her mother, and Judy disposed of it. Following Christina and Danny's confessions, both were arrested. Now the police had to arrest the puppeteer behind her husband's murder, Judy Parker, but the police had absolutely nothing against her. Fortunately, her children agreed to testify against their mother in exchange for reduced sentences. Then Judy decided to confess her guilt in 2009. Christina was sentenced to 5 years in prison for her role in the crime. However, after her release in 2013, she died of a drug overdose at the age of 27. Danny was sentenced to 23 years. He was released 3 years after his sister in 2016. Judy was sentenced to 33 years in prison. She was released in 2023. Judy spent her entire life as a sales agent, and she certainly found a way to sell the idea of murder to her own children. Most likely, she manipulated them for years, and only when they were distanced from her could they clearly see the whole picture. Of course, Judy could have divorced, but she would have received only half of the property and wouldn't have received the $1 million from the insurance. Additionally, John had evidence of marital infidelity. He gave his wife a ticket to a luxurious life, but she no longer wanted to see her husband nearby, yet she wanted to have it all, and anyone standing in her way between the life she had and the life she wanted had to disappear. She forced her teenage children to commit murder, robbing them of their childhood and burdening them with a heavy load. And she shattered the lives of her younger daughters, who now have no father, no older sister, and essentially no mother. Christmas 2017 didn't start off well for the Aguilar family from Elche, Spain. The family owns a bakery, so the holidays are the busiest time for their business. Spouses Rosa and Alberto Aguilar decided not to keep all the earnings at home and took them to the bank. But when Rosa approached the cupboard where the family kept the money, only small change fell out of the pouch. 6,000 or 7,000 euros were missing. The spouses were afraid they had been robbed, but the door lock was intact, and there were no signs of a break-in in the house either. Then they decided that perhaps their daughter Patricia knows more. Patricia Aguilar is the eldest child of Alberto and Rosa. 2 weeks ago, she turned 18. Patricia was a typical teenager, albeit a bit introverted and shy. She studied art and spent a lot of time in her room on the computer. Her parents were worried that she had few friends and was becoming reclusive. Therefore, Rosa was very happy when her daughter said she had been invited to a birthday party. The girl left with an overnight bag and has not returned since. Her parents wrote and called her, but she did not answer. They didn't know what to think. Considering that the money went missing at the same time as Patricia, Alberto decided to contact the police. But the police were confident she would return soon and didn't rush to find the 18-year-old girl. By evening, the issue of money no longer concerned the parents. They wrote to Patricia that they wouldn't scold her as long as she returned home. That night, they couldn't close their eyes. When they finally received the message, "Everything is fine, I will contact you in a few hours," from their daughter Alberto and Rosa didn't buy it. The message was not written in the way their daughter would have done it. Now the parents were convinced that something had happened. The most likely scenario seemed to them that the thief who stole the money had kidnapped the girl and taken her phone. Rosa couldn't sit and wait, knowing that the police were not taking any action, so she went into her daughter's room and searched through all her belongings. Every book, notebook, pillow, stuffed toy. She even looked under the lamp and behind the paintings. She realized she had found what she was looking for, although it was not at all what she expected. There were some esoteric symbols, descriptions of rituals written by Patricia's hand, and also clear instructions for a trip and marriage registration in Peru with descriptions of the necessary documents. Shocked, Rosa asked her husband if their daughter had run away to Peru to get married there, with whom. The police assured them that the girl had not crossed the country's borders. The plot thickened. Among her daughter's belongings, Rosa found photos of adult women she didn't know. Then for the first time, the thought crept into her mind that a cult might be behind all this, which she hurried to share with the police. But they dismissed her again, because 2 weeks ago the girl turned legal age and could do whatever she wanted. Weeks passed without any news, and Rosa and Alberto decided to turn to the public. They understood that the internet would be of invaluable help to them in this, but the Aguilar spouses were not familiar with it. They didn't even use social networks. Therefore, they turned to Noelia, Rosa's cousin. Patricia treated her as an older sister. Noelia responded in kind, and when her help was needed without hesitation, Noelia closed her shop in Benidorm and came to Elche. It was not difficult for her to find out that Patricia had been communicating a lot with some guy who sent her lists of books on black magic and esoterica. One word appeared particularly often in her notes: gnosis. As Noelia read, the concept of Gnosticism involves the search for knowledge, truth, but in the 1950s, several groups emerged claiming that allegedly to be saved in the apocalypse, one needed to cleanse oneself of sins. This could be done by engaging in intimate relationships as often as possible. Becoming carriers of such truth, the new followers of the doctrine had to renounce their families because other people were doomed, they were enemies. After finding all this out, Patricia's relatives realized that they didn't really know the girl and that she had been living a double life for a long time. A few more days passed, and Patricia got in touch. She wrote to Noelia that she was fine, but she wouldn't return, and attached a photo showing her holding a piece of paper with the date. She explained that she and her boyfriend were traveling in a mobile home across Europe, and they were currently in Pitești. But Pitești is in Romania, and the police assured them that the girl had not left Spanish territory. A quick search online told Noelia that on that day in Pitesti, the temperature had dropped to -6 degrees Celsius, and the girl was wearing just a t-shirt. Noelia tried to call her back and found out that the girl's phone operator only serves South American countries. If, according to the police, Patricia had not left Spain, how did her phone do that? When Noelia tried to confront Patricia with this new information, she became agitated and rudely demanded to be left alone. But Noelia wasn't going to give up. In fact, the police were mistaken. On the very first day of her disappearance, when Patricia supposedly went to her friend's birthday party, she flew to Lima, Peru. After 2 years of online communication, she finally met her beloved, Stephen. He met her at the airport and immediately took her to a hotel. There, he became Patricia's first man. Thanks to the money she brought with her, they were able to rent a small apartment, where Patricia met 29-year-old Mariori Garcia Valverde and 42-year-old Paula Vega, the other, as he called them, wives of the man. Patricia knew she would become Stephen's third wife, but he didn't warn her that they would live with 4 children, Paula's daughter and 2 girls and a boy from Mariori. So 8 people ended up living in a small apartment, and there was no space for intimacy, which they were supposed to engage in every day. Stephen and Patricia met 2 years ago. It was a very difficult time for the teenage girl. Patricia had an uncle, her mother's brother, Jose. He loved his niece very much, spoiled her, spent time with her when her parents were busy. For Patricia, he was both an older brother and a father figure. However, in 2015, 29-year-old Jose fell ill. He was diagnosed with pancreatitis. People recover from this illness, but complications arose in Jose's case. He passed away within 4 months. The whole family was devastated. While Alberto was able to fully immerse himself in work, his wife Rosa and Patricia couldn't cope with the pain of loss. Rosa developed depression and found solace in simple computer games that allowed her to distract herself. Unfortunately, during this time, she distanced herself from her children and husband, and Patricia, who needed the support of her loved ones more than ever, became very vulnerable. She began to ponder what happens after death, as she could not accept that death was the end. She became interested in this topic, visited relevant websites, and she met Stephen, a man with very developed communicative and manipulative abilities. He studied psychology books to know how to penetrate the consciousness of every person. He called himself a savior, a messenger facing the impending end of the world, apocalypse. He made naive girls believe that they were a couple in a past life and that his wives, his queens, had a mission to populate the world after the apocalypse. Stephen realized that Patricia was the perfect victim because she was a teenager and, as is often the case at that age, felt insecure and believed that nobody cared about her. All of this combined with her natural innocence. Stephen took advantage of her psychological vulnerability due to her uncle's death and used his persuasive methods to lure her into his traps. While her family was preoccupied, for 2 years Stephen worked on the girl's mind to isolate her, and no one noticed anything until it was too late. The girl believed she was safe because Stephen was on the other side of the globe. He gradually manipulated her, first asking for pictures in lingerie, then nude. Only after that did they discuss intimate moments, and the girl agreed that he had 2 wives. He explained this by saying that from a biological point of view, a man is created for relationships with many women, but a woman can only have one husband because a woman is a temple. Relationships with a man allow a woman to progress spiritually. A man can do this himself, but for a woman, this is the only way. And now, after 2 years of online communication, Patricia gave up everything and ran away to Stephen. He gave her a new name, Silvana, which means born in the jungle. But she had to get used not only to the new name. She had never taken forbidden substances, and Stephen made her consume a root that caused strong hallucinations. He didn't hesitate to give it to the children either. Meanwhile, the girl's family didn't give up trying to find her. They were lucky that Patricia left plenty of clues behind. Among her notes, Noelia found logins and passwords to computer games and social networks. One attracted her attention because it was repeated several times. Nicoli. It turned out to be the girl's secret page, where she expressed her thoughts about the afterlife. Among her friends, Noelia noticed a young man named Steven Martinez, and in his friends list there were only girls, 3,000 girls, all roughly Patricia's age. Noelia suspected that he might be behind all this. It was some progress, but for now, Noelia only found the guy's name on the internet. They needed evidence. Then the girl's mother searched Patricia's room again and noticed an interesting document. It turned out to be a medical certificate issued by a hospital in Lima, Peru, in the name of Paula Vega. Rosa realized they had stumbled upon a significant lead, finding Patricia's connection to Peru. The parents turned to the police, who passed the information to Interpol and eventually to the police in Peru. Stephen became nervous when the police called Paula and asked for clarification regarding Patricia. Even before Patricia's escape, he had asked her to forge a medical certificate for Paula, but instead of destroying the copy, she put it in a drawer in her room and completely forgot about it. And now they had problems. If Paula testified, the police would start digging deeper. Stephen decided to get Patricia out of trouble. They went together to the police station. Like a vulture, he watched her every word, controlling her every move. At his direction, the girl told the officers that nobody had kidnapped her and that she wanted to live in Peru. Since Patricia was of legal age, the police saw no crime. They simply let the couple go. This disappointed the girl's family, but at least they learned Stephen's full name, Felix Stephen Manrique Gomez, and they decided to change their approach, to turn to the media. This decision changed everything. The Aguilar family wanted as many people as possible to learn about Stephen's methods, to prevent him from luring other girls into his cult. It was risky because Stephen could either send Patricia home or flee with her. As it turned out, Stephen chose the third option. As soon as he saw his face on the news program, he smashed all the phones and computers and kicked Patricia out of the apartment. He ordered her to contact the embassy to get the opportunity to contact the media and fix everything. Until then, she would be alone on the street, without food or shelter. After a few days, she managed to reach out to a TV program and give an interview live. At first, her parents were relieved to see she was alive. But the things she said broke their hearts. The girl didn't hold back her words, aiming to hurt her parents to the core. She stated that she didn't want to know Rosa and Alberto because they were bad parents. Her father was never home, her mother played computer games for days, and nobody paid attention to her, didn't feed her or buy her clothes. She considered her Uncle Jose as her real father, and essentially her grandmother raised her. Patricia demanded that they remove all information from the internet, all photos, messages about the search, and send her money. Only then would she send them her address. After that, she would decide what to do next. Finally, she told her father, "Do you know why I was so happy in the photos from my birthday? I dreamed of running away since I was 14, and now I finally could leave home." It was painful for the parents to hear this, and many of their acquaintances and even relatives believed the girl's words. After such a shocking statement, both the police and the media lost interest in the case. But her family didn't give up. Noelia decided to make the most of social media opportunities. She created a fake profile similar to Patricia's and requested to be friends with Stephen. She tried to portray herself as a teenage girl interested in esoterics, but perhaps she pressed too hard, asking for his phone number to communicate in Messenger. He suspected that she wasn't who she claimed to be, but mistook her for some Karen. He blocked her, but Noelia was already unstoppable. In Stephen's friend list, she found one Karen. It was a girl whose photo she had already seen among Patricia's belongings. Contacting her, Noelia learned that Karen had also been in the cult, but she managed to break free from Stephen's clutches. However, her sister Mai not only had been with him, but also was his only official wife. Karen confessed that she was afraid for her sister and advised reaching out to her mother Alinda. Perhaps she could help in some way. Despite Patricia partially managing to improve the situation with her interview, Stephen turned into a paranoid. He moved the girls and children to San Martin de Pangoa, a region 12 hours away from Lima by bus, in the middle of the jungle. It was a dangerous place with water and electricity shortages, and they could go weeks without bathing, both adults and children. There was also a lack of money for food. The meager coins they had were spent on candles and hallucinogenic roots that Stephen used during rituals. Patricia, now called Silva, deleted all her social media accounts, cut her long hair, and dyed it black. It was tough for the fugitives. A man with 3 women and 4 children, one of whom was clearly a foreigner. Cornered, Stephen became increasingly aggressive. He began mistreating Patricia very badly. Once he even told Mai, maybe we should just kill her? But it wasn't easier for the others. He severely beat the children and girls, using a leather whip, the effect of which was like being hit by 3 whips simultaneously. He beat the children for any reason, especially Mai's son, the only boy. Patricia got tired of this quickly and told Stephen that she would leave him, to which he threatened to take his anger out on the children. Despite the girls being willing to do anything for Stephen, even give their lives for him, he soon started asking for things that were beyond even their limits. Living nearby were girls who were rumored to be night butterflies despite their young age. Mai made the mistake of mentioning this to her husband. Stephen claimed that the girls would supposedly help him with a new ritual and demanded to arrange a meeting. But Mai couldn't do it because they were underage. She even considered Patricia too young for Stephen. The man became so enraged that he grabbed his wife by the neck and began to strangle her. She was almost suffocated and couldn't breathe. He would have killed her if Patricia hadn't intervened. Only then did Stephen release his victim. Patricia felt terrible, longing to return home to her parents but afraid of what they would say after all her actions. She lost her zest for life until suddenly everything changed. She realized she was expecting a child. Many advised the Aguilar family to forget about Patricia and stop searching, but her parents decided otherwise. Rosa stayed with her younger son in Elche, while Alberto went to Peru because they couldn't achieve much from Spain. But Peru was a large country, and Alberto was a stranger there, so he sought the support of Olinda, the mother of Karen and Mai. They found a prosecutor willing to help them, and the police began investigating, treating the case as one of human trafficking. The first place the officers visited was Patricia's apartment, from where Stephen had already taken her. Alberto could barely hold himself together when neighbors told stories of often hearing screams and blows and witnessing the girls being forced into intimate relationships in front of the children. Since Stephen had taken the children out of school and away with the girls in an unknown direction, detectives decided to track their phones. Stephen was horrified at the thought of being found, so the phones were almost always turned off. All they could do was wait for someone in the group to turn on their phone. Meanwhile, investigators found out who this Stephen was. The 35-year-old man was born in Lima into a poor and troubled family. He was bullied by other boys at school, which led him to spend time only with girls. From childhood, he learned how to manipulate them. His father gave him a book that helped Stephen join the Gnostics, but he was expelled because he drew ideas from other cults and called himself a prophet. Gradually, he came to found his own cult. When Stephen and the girls ran out of money, they moved to Alto Celendon, a tiny village with 30 houses. They settled into a hut right in the middle of the jungle. Mostly drug dealers and those avoiding the police, like them, inhabited the area. There was no water, electricity, or food in the hut. At best, they ate only rice and potatoes. Patricia was already 8 months pregnant, but due to severe malnutrition, it seemed like she was only in her 3rd month. The hut was surrounded by huge puddles, and everyone had to constantly wear boots. Fungal infections appeared on everyone's feet, even the children. Their feet were covered in insect bite marks, and their heads had colonies of lice. It was a disgusting place for them and the children, including the unborn ones, because Mai was also pregnant. Mai feared for her children's health. It was very difficult for her in such conditions. Despite her husband's prohibition, she turned on her phone and called her mother, just to hear her voice. The girl didn't even say anything, but it was enough for the police to trace the call. Detectives believed the fugitives were in Lima, but it turned out Stephen had taken them deep into the jungle. The police decided to send 2 officers to the region who knew the case best. They were given 10 days to search. They showed pictures of the group members to everyone passing by, assuming that the girl resembling Patricia would stand out among the other locals. The officers didn't know that she had not only changed her appearance, but also didn't have permission to leave the city. The police decided to go even higher into the mountains. Their persistence paid off. One girl they showed the pictures to recognized Paula. She described her as a strange woman in pink boots who returns home every evening across the bridge with a food package. The officers began to wait at the bridge, and the woman indeed appeared. She moved like a robot, not looking at anyone. The officers followed her. 40 minutes later, they went beyond the city limits and deeper into the forest. Finally, she entered a house where rooms were rented out. The police decided to rent a room in the house because otherwise they couldn't conduct surveillance. They were lucky. They got a room right next to Paula's. They could hear everything happening in the other room. They heard the voices of a man, Paula, and another girl. It turned out to be Mai. But Patricia or the children were not visible. The police did not take more decisive action because Stephen never left the room, not even to use the restroom, and they were not sure if it was him. Naturally, he didn't work. Paula and Mai did while the man lay in bed, and the officers were afraid that he simply wouldn't say where Patricia was. Suddenly, they overheard the man saying that tomorrow they would split up and leave one by one. Stephen planned to go even further to settlements of more wild indigenous tribes. Upon hearing this, the police officers called for backup to capture them. Knowing their schedule, they were able to apprehend group members one by one. Paula was stopped when she left for work early in the morning. Mai also left the house to do laundry. As for Stephen, when the police entered, he was lying on the bed as usual. The man resisted, introduced himself by another name, and pretended not to understand what was happening. To prevent him from stepping barefoot on the floor, pregnant Mai gave him her shoes. After that, he was forcibly removed from the hut. Fortunately, the girls immediately disclosed where Patricia was. By Stephen's command, Patricia and all the children remained in the hut as far away in the jungle as possible when Stephen, Mai, and Paula went to earn money, although Stephen, of course, didn't work. Patricia did everything around the house, took care of the children, and even worked on the plantation near the hut. She was there when the officers arrived. They called her by name. She had become so accustomed to the name Silvana that hearing Patricia felt unfamiliar. The officers believed they were rescuing Patricia and 4 children, but there were already 5. When Stephen, Paula, and Mai left for the city, Patricia begged not to be left alone, but Stephen was adamant, and predictably, at 8.5 months, she began having contractions. She screamed in agony. The children were with her but didn't know how to help her. At the girl's screams, a neighbor came. She was the one who assisted in the delivery. Patricia admits that she never thought she would give birth in the jungle at 19. The girl was extremely thin, looked exhausted when they rescued her, but even then she continued to think only about Stephen and the things he instilled in her. Meanwhile, Stephen was interrogated at the police station. An interesting fact emerged during the investigation. He was left alone with 2 colleagues briefly, and when they returned, one officer had already fallen under his influence. She claimed that Stephen was a prophet and they should help him, not arrest him. Immediately after Patricia, Mai, and Paula were rescued, they were separated as recommended by psychologists. They received assistance as victims of cults, sects, and dependent groups. It took them a long time before they started feeling better. They seemed to be in a lethargic state, but eventually, they woke up. The Aguilar family says that now everything that happened is in the past. They started anew, without accusations, without questions, without doubts. Patricia is still undergoing therapy and lives in her hometown with her parents and daughter. She received education in social rehabilitation and works in an organization that helps people with disabilities. Stephen was sentenced to 20 years in prison for human trafficking, sexual and labor exploitation. Many wondered how Patricia's parents didn't notice the changes in their daughter. Patricia was always a good student, but after her beloved uncle left her life, she started failing. Strangely enough, Stephen motivated her to study better, so they noticed changes in their daughter and they liked them. They thought she was coming to her senses. At that time, she was dating a boy from school whom her father didn't like. Alberto was happy when she dumped him. She stopped dressing in black, bought bright clothes, smiled more often, and asked to have a party for her 18th birthday. But her parents couldn't have known that all this was Stephen's demands. There were signs to pay attention to, but you never think that someone from another distant country will infiltrate your home through the internet and take away a family member. Dedication, obedience, detachment from the family happens very slowly, insidiously. It's in the cult's interest for their followers not to have loving and caring people around them. Everyone thinks that nothing like this will ever happen to them, but in moments of weakness, anyone can become vulnerable. Patricia Aguilar experienced firsthand what it's like to be isolated by a cult, taken out of her native country and taken away from her family. With her story, she wants to protect others from falling into the subtle mechanisms used by these false prophets. This case could have gone unnoticed by many, but became known thanks to Patricia's parents, who in their struggle to locate their daughter, managed to grab the attention of the media in different countries and share this story. On November 6, 1994, Jan Balmain stands on the platform of Newcastle Railway Station, Australia. She cranes her neck, trying to catch sight of the approaching train. Jan eagerly awaits the arrival of her 22-year-old daughter, Ravel, who boarded the train to Sydney. The journey takes just 2 hours. A mother waits, anticipating her daughter, an extraordinarily beautiful blonde with blue eyes, tall and slender, to flutter onto the platform and embrace her. Ravel Balmain lives in the prestigious Sydney suburb of Bellevue Hill, not far from the city centre. She is a model and a dancer. She had planned to visit her parents before a work trip to Japan, where her troupe awaited her for their 4th tour. But there is much that Jan doesn't know about her daughter, And on this November day, Ravel does not disembark in Newcastle. Traces of her short life are scattered across Sydney's streets, including items intended to accompany her to Japan, a journey she will never make. 22-year-old Ravel Balmain was close to realizing her dream. As a professional dancer, she had already visited Japan on 3 concert tours and eagerly anticipated her 4th trip. She supplemented her income by modeling, appearing in magazine spreads and product advertisements. Just a few days later, a new issue of a popular Australian magazine featuring Ravel on the cover was scheduled for release, an esteemed accomplishment for a model. Additionally, 4 weeks ago, Ravel met a promising 27-year-old director named Piers Fisher-Pollard. Young, beautiful, and talented, Ravel had high expectations for life, and it seemed like her entire life lay ahead of her. Ravel started dancing at the age of 3. She adored music, jazz, and tap dancing. During her teenage years, she spent a year in a theater school in Britain. However, upon returning from her first concert tour, she realized that performing on stage was her true calling. Unfortunately, it didn't pay as well as she'd hoped, so she juggled dancing with modeling jobs. But even that wasn't enough to cover her bills. Therefore, she decided to improve her financial situation by offering her services to an escort agency. Many girls work in this field for a very short time, facing difficulties, and she was one of them. Much later, Ravel's mother would state that her daughter's decision shocked her family. She had grown up in a loving family, always supportive of their children, and if financial troubles arose, she could have turned to them. The woman speculated that the deeply hidden reason for this decision might have been related to an incident when Ravel was 4 years old and found her 1.5-year-old brother Matthew floating in the pool. He couldn't be saved, and it was very difficult for her parents to recover from this. Perhaps Ravel never managed to overcome it. Nevertheless, in November 1994, Ravel's boyfriend, family, and most of her friends had no idea about her side job. Saturday, November 5th, 1994, was supposed to be her last day working in escort services. At some point, her life took a turn, but after 6 weeks of leading a double life, she was returning to her true love and passion, dance. The day before, she had lunch with her friend Kate Brentnall, who described her as happier than she had ever been. She was very excited about her trip to Japan. Ravel had dyed her hair to a softer, more natural blonde. I thought it was symbolic. I thought she had never looked more beautiful. Sadly, that journey would never take place, because the next evening she disappeared under highly suspicious circumstances. Ravel spent Saturday morning with Piers. In the short time they had been dating, they had become inseparable. However, suddenly Piers developed an intense headache, forcing them to go to the hospital. After seeing the doctor, Ravel suggested having lunch, but Piers declined due to his migraine. Around noon, he escorted her to a bus stop. Ravel headed to the city center while Piers preferred to lie down. At that time, Ravel was working for 2 different escort agencies. One of them was managed by Jane Stanojevic and Zoran Stanojevic. As her boyfriend, Piers, couldn't spend time with her, Ravel called Jane and Zoran's escort agency to inform them that she was available. The administrator replied that she had a 2-hour booking from 4 p.m. It was for a new client, a young man named Gavin Samer, who lived in the eastern suburb of Sydney called Kingsford. Later at 10 p.m., she had another appointment with friends of Zoran from Serbia. Zoran was eager to please his friends and suggested having her accompany them to the hotel because he wanted to offer them the most beautiful girl. Ravel arrived at Gavin Samer's house with a bottle of champagne as requested by Gavin. She was wearing cork wedge shoes, a long skirt, and a tunic. She had a pager. During that time, there were no mobile phones, so escort agencies handed pagers to the girls, sending them messages as new orders came in. At 3:50 p.m., Ravel used Gavin's phone to call the administrator and let them know she had arrived. This was a way for the girl to signal that she felt comfortable at the client's house and that everything was fine. 2 hours later, at 5:50 p.m., she called the administrator again and said the meeting was over and she was leaving, but there was no need to send a driver for her. However, as Gavin later revealed, she didn't leave, but instead arranged to spend an extra hour with him for additional payment. This was a risky practice because the owners of the escort agencies did not approve and sometimes punished the girls for such side jobs, naturally because they didn't receive their share of the profit. While she was with Gavin, her boyfriend Piers messaged her, feeling much better. She told him she'd lay down to rest. Piers easily believed this as he had no suspicion about her side job. At 7 p.m., she received a message on her pager from her friend Kate Brittle. 15 minutes later, Ravel called back and let her friend know she couldn't talk, but would call from home in an hour after changing, and then they would have a couple of beers together at the Royal Hotel, a popular pub in Sydney. Afterward, she planned to meet Pierce. The sun set that day at 7:25 p.m., according to Gavin. That was the last time he saw Ravel when he dropped her off at the nearest pub, the Tomato Inn. He pulled up to the pub, she got out of the car, said goodbye, and entered through the back door. Gavin then went to a store for cigarettes and cider before heading home, watching TV, and going to bed. At 7:53 p.m., Ravel's boyfriend Pierce sent her another message on her pager, but she didn't reply. By this time, Pierce had met their mutual friend Zoe. They were visiting different bars in the city, and Pierce constantly messaged Ravel on her pager so she'd know where to find them. The last time he attempted to contact her was at 2:30 a.m. Then he went home to sleep. She didn't respond to any of his messages. On the following day, November 6th, Ravel's mother, Jen Belmain, stood on the railway platform in Newcastle, awaiting the arrival of the train from Sydney, on which her daughter was supposed to arrive. Ravel's parents were eagerly anticipating their daughter's arrival to have a sort of farewell celebratory dinner, to catch up, chat, share the latest news before she was due to embark on a 2-week rehearsal in Brisbane, followed by her troupe's upcoming 4-month tour in Japan. The train arrived, but Ravel wasn't on it. Jen assumed that her daughter might have missed the early morning train and waited for the next one. However, Ravel still didn't appear. As time passed, Jen realized that something was amiss. She returned home and immediately made phone calls. She contacted her daughter's friend, the apartment neighbor, and hospitals in Sydney, trying to ascertain her whereabouts. When Ravel's apartment neighbor informed Jen that Ravel's room still had an almost fully packed suitcase with her belongings, passport, and ticket to Japan, Jen realized it was time to involve the police. Jen, along with Ravel's apartment neighbor and her boyfriend Pierce, reported Ravel missing. However, the police were not swift in commencing an investigation, despite the discovery of Ravel's belongings scattered throughout the Kingsford area, where her last client, Gavin Seymour, resided. Her bag, cosmetics, diary, credit cards, and keys to the Bellevue Hill apartment were found strewn across different streets. One of her high heels was found in a trash bin, while the other was discovered in a nearby block. The plastic casing of her pager was lying in a gutter. On the 5th day after the girl's disappearance, when everything indicated an unfortunate event involving Ravel, the police started their investigation. Initially, they explored the version that Ravel was abducted on the streets of Kingsford, with the abductor throwing her belongings out of the car window while driving. Wild rumors circulated, suggesting she might have been abducted at the request of an Arabian prince and taken to Saudi Arabia. However, the police attempted to investigate more realistic scenarios. Pierce was the first to be excluded from the list of suspects. Investigators considered the possibility that he might have learned about the girl's double life and became so furious that he killed Ravel. However, when informed about her side jobs, it was a double blow for the young man. He had an alibi for the evening of her disappearance, and apart from her family, a few friends, and her roommate, he was one of the few people who insisted on continuing the investigation, demanding a more serious approach to the case. Next in line as a suspect was Gavin. Several suspicious moments arose in his story. He recounted that on that Saturday, when he decided to engage the services of the escort agency, his girlfriend Michelle had left home to visit her family. He hired Ravel and paid her $500 for 3 hours. To pay Ravel, he pawned Michelle's clarinet and received $250 for it. Additionally, he won $150 at slot machines in the Tomato Inn pub. This summed up to $400. He paid this in cash and another $100 to Ravel by check. However, the pub staff couldn't recall cashing out his winnings, and he allegedly lost his family's checkbook. Even in the store where he bought cigarettes and cider, there were no records corresponding to the man's claims. His girlfriend Michelle was, of course, questioned. She flew from Brisbane to Sydney 2 days after Ravel's disappearance. Gavin met her at the airport, and she immediately noticed scratches on Gavin's chest and neck. There was also a mark on his finger, as if from a bite. The police also noticed these wounds, but Gavin couldn't explain where they came from, whether from surfing activities or gardening. Michelle also pointed out that Gavin cleaned his car and folded the rear seats, although she added that he often turned the car into a mess, then cleaned it to accommodate his surfboard. Additionally, her incredibly lazy boyfriend laundered the bedding and hung it out to dry just before her arrival. She found it suspicious, but it likely indicated his attempt to hide infidelity rather than criminal activity. Unfortunately, due to the lack of evidence, the police couldn't even conclusively prove that a crime had occurred. The Ravel parents were determined to seek justice for their daughter, but no one was arrested or charged with anything. A member of the Ravel family claimed that the police considered Ravel's life less valuable because she was promiscuous, hence they half-heartedly conducted the investigation. Gavin's house was searched not immediately after the girl's disappearance, and even then, it was done without a warrant. It was more of a cursory inspection. Gavin's car was checked for DNA and other evidence only after 10 days. Many crucial witnesses were not interviewed and evidence was not gathered. Naturally, the investigation stalled, and there were no developments in it for several years. Only in 1999, after an active campaign by the public, media, and the girl's relatives, did interest in the case resurface, and it was reviewed by the coroner. The detective who led the initial investigation told the coroner that, in the police's opinion, Gavin was the prime suspect in the case. Even Gavin's lawyer, Seymour, was forced to agree that his client was the sole suspect. Gavin worked for the girl's parents' company and at the time was an attractive, successful young man. Additionally, he was quite athletic as he loved surfing. Gavin lived with his girlfriend, Michelle, but when she went to visit her family, he decided to hire an escort. Gavin was the last person seen with Ravel. According to him, she spent an additional hour with him before he dropped her off at the Red Tomato Inn, a pub in Kingsford. He parked his car in the back. Ravel exited the car, said goodbye, and walked inside through the back door. He then went to a store and headed home. However, nobody at the pub who was present at that time could recall seeing Ravel. The owner explicitly stated that they had a different crowd that evening, and if such a girl had entered the pub, everyone would have noticed. Despite Gavin purchasing cider at the store, no one remembered this. In other words, after Ravel's last call to her friend from Gavin's house at 7:15 p.m., nothing from Gavin's account was officially confirmed. Moreover, Michelle, now his ex-girlfriend, told the coroner in 1999 that she called Gavin that evening but got no answer. After several attempts, she finally got through at 9:22 p.m. and he sounded agitated. His other ex-girlfriend, who had been involved with him before, stated that after drinking, he could become aggressive and hit her in the face. This raised suspicions further, especially because Gavin had been drinking on Saturday throughout the day and had at least consumed half a bottle of champagne brought by Ravel. However, one witness, a young man named Jeremy Coughlin, offered a completely different scenario of what might have happened to Ravel. Jeremy was a friend of one of Ravel's wealthiest clients, Mark Colton. Jeremy recounted that he and Mark were at a party when, after a few drinks, Mark abruptly said, "Aren't people stupid? Have you heard about Ravel Belmain? First, there were rumors about an Arab prince who took her to Saudi Arabia. Nonsense. She's at a depth of 3 meters and nobody will find her body. That's what you get for deceiving the brothel you work for. The brothel owner wanted her dead because she was damaging his business." Jeremy asked his friend about Mark's relationship with Ravel, and he replied that he met her outside the brothel, paying her between $500 to $1,000 a week, which was cheaper than paying the agency $200 per hour. When Mark Colton was questioned, he denied saying anything like that, but he indeed had heard rumors that agencies were threatening employees who saw clients privately. Owners of the agency were also questioned. It turned out that on Ravel's last day working at the escort agency, she owed Jane and Zoran money, around $300. However, as explained by Jane, this wasn't considered unusual. While most clients pay with credit cards, some prefer cash, and at the end of each week, the girls in the agency reconcile who owes what to whom. According to Jane, Ravel was planning to repay the money owing to a meeting with Zoran's friends scheduled for 10 p.m. However, Zoran claimed he was unaware of such an agreement. In fact, his words contradicted those of his wife on almost every point. Jane described that on the day the girl disappeared, she and Zoran bought a television, had pizza at a pizzeria around 5 p.m., and went home. She didn't work that night because she was heavily pregnant and tired. However, Zoran told the police he didn't work on the evening of the girl's disappearance, literally saying, "No, not on Saturday." He claimed he took the TV to the office, installed it, and returned home around 7 p.m. Yet, 4 years later, during the coroner's inquest, he stated that by saying, "No, not on Saturday," he meant not during the day on Saturday. In reality, he did work that evening and returned home around 2 a.m. He blamed the misunderstanding on the translator. However, later, a linguistic expert confirmed that the original statements of the man were translated correctly. Regardless, Zoran claimed he did not see Ravel that night. As the agency's driver, he picked up another girl, Kelly, at 7:15 p.m. He took her to meet his friends at Royal Hotel Park in Darling Harbor, where he waited for 2 hours before driving her to another appointment at the Sheraton Airport Hotel. When he was taking the girl home, he had a flat tire, which he had to fix himself. For 4 years following the girl's disappearance and before the case was considered by the coroner, the police did not interview either Zoran's Serbian friends, who had long since left for Belgrade, or Kelly, Ravel's colleague, who provided Zoran's alibi. Partly this was because when Jane Stanojevic gave her initial statement in 1994, she said that Ravel was supposed to meet the Serbians at the Swiss Grand Hotel in Bondi. After 4 years, she claimed she had made a mistake and actually meant the Park Royal Hotel in Darling Harbor. It wasn't until 1999 that the police checked the registration records of both hotels, finding no information about the Serbians in either. Only after Zoran's testimony did the police locate Kelly, who reluctantly corroborated his words. However, when the police checked the Sheraton Hotel records, they couldn't find evidence of Kelly or her client being there. Gavin Seymour, the lawyer, was puzzled as to why the girl was miraculously found only now, why she wasn't questioned 4 years ago, and why the police didn't investigate inconsistencies between Zoran's and his wife's statements, which couldn't even agree on whether he was working on November 5th, 1994. In response to all these questions, the chief investigator who led the initial investigation said that he didn't know. The Ravel family was deeply upset by what they heard during the coroner's inquest. The police failed to interview many crucial witnesses, and other witnesses, of course, had long forgotten what they had seen over such a period of time. Their lawyers stated that the girl's parents were treated as a nuisance, despite their only desire being to know what happened to their daughter. Didn't they deserve that? Even the coroner was forced to agree that the initial investigation wasn't as thorough as it should have been. After examining the case, the coroner dismissed the theory that Ravel staged her own disappearance because there was no evidence to support it. After all, if she wanted to disappear, the timing was extremely inconvenient. She was already planning an extended trip to Japan and would have returned to pursue her career as a model and dancer with renewed vigor, making her short stint as a call girl forgettable. Additionally, her personal life seemed perfect. She and Piers were crazy about each other, and there was nothing indicating that she wanted to run away. On May 28, 1999, the coroner ruled that Ravel was murdered on November 5, 1994, by an unknown person or persons. He noted that there wasn't sufficient evidence against the police's main suspect, Gavin Seymour. However, if his name had been hidden from the public eye until then, now everyone knew who was considered the prime suspect in the case. Before the coroner ruled that Ravel was murdered, the police had no body or evidence to work with. It was only in 2008 that detectives from the cold case unit sent forensic experts to Gavin's house, due to advancements in technology. Subsequently, detectives went to Tasmania to question Gavin, but he refused to provide DNA. Gavin, once a successful young man, moved to Tasmania and worked as a chef due to being essentially accused without trial of Ravel's murder. He led a very secluded life, drank heavily, and hardly interacted with locals. After spending 15 years there, he returned to Sydney in 2018. He only spoke to a journalist once, explaining that the case had cost him job opportunities and felt as though he was punished without being proven guilty. He knew people considered him guilty, but he claimed innocence. In reality, he was more preoccupied with how the case affected him than Ravel and her loved ones. However, he stated he didn't kill Ravel. He was only guilty of hiring a call girl that day. Ravel's parents passed away without receiving answers about their daughter. What happened to her? Who killed her and why? Her sister still hopes the case will progress. Over the years, she searched for her sister's body. Now, she seeks answers. She needs to know who killed Ravel. It seems her prayers were answered because in 2021, a new phase of the investigation began. The police announced a reward of $1 million for information leading to Ravel's killer's arrest. Additionally, Jane King, former owner of the escort agency and Zoran's ex-wife, made an incredible statement. She said she never thought Gavin Seymour could be involved in Ravel's disappearance. However, she now had new evidence supporting Gavin's truth, evidence that would help clear his name but was not found by the police conducting the initial investigation. Essentially, his whereabouts that evening were confirmed. That's all she could disclose at the moment. This new information turned the investigation upside down. In fact, a series of new facts were discovered in the case, crucial enough to be presented to the coroner in February next year. Yes, it took almost 30 years, but the police identified clear contradictions that shifted the entire focus of the investigation. While old evidence still needs testing with new technologies, the new investigation is focused on Jane's ex-husband Zoran and his constantly changing story. He was one of the main drivers for the company, transporting girls to clients. However, there were always discrepancies in the statements he gave to the police. During the initial interrogation, 10 days after Ravel's disappearance, he claimed he wasn't working that night, but was at home with his wife. In 1999, he admitted to being at work, but his new version of events still didn't align because the evidence crucial to his alibi was not found. Ravel was supposed to meet Zoran's Serbian friends at 10 p.m., but for some reason, the police never questioned them. Incredibly, in 2021, an anonymous call was made to an organization called Crime Stoppers regarding this man, in the photo, who could be involved in the crime. This likely refers to Bojan Prevalovic, Zoran's friend and Ravel's last presumed client. While Jane King never met her husband's friend, she now knows that Zoran arranged something for him the day after the girl's disappearance. He bought a ticket from Australia to Thailand. Essentially, the man Ravel was supposed to meet that evening left the country the very next day after her disappearance, and no one bothered to inquire about the reason for such haste or coincidence. In December 2021, a raid was conducted on Zoran's property, revealing cannabis worth $400,000 and exclusive items valued at $150,000. He faced 36 charges and was denied bail. Most importantly, according to the police, the raids were carried out based on information obtained during the new investigation into Ravel Belmane's disappearance and presumed murder. A detective explicitly stated they were investigating Zoran's involvement in the crime. However, if Zoran's behavior appears unusual, no less suspicious are the actions of Jane King herself. On the day Ravel disappeared, she and Zoran had lunch at a pizza place. The next morning, upon learning that Ravel wasn't answering calls or messages, Jane immediately dialed the pizza place's number. A staff member recalls her being in a panic, as if it were crucial for her to secure an alibi. She allegedly said to the staff member, "The police are investigating a murder. Can you confirm that we were at your restaurant?" Jane denies phrasing it this way. She insists she said disappearance. But regardless of whether she said murder or disappearance, why was she in such a hurry to confirm her alibi on the very day Ravel, a grown 22-year-old woman, had disappeared just a few hours ago? Where did this rush come from? Why was she so certain that Ravel simply missed her last evening order, given that such occurrences had been noted before? Jane King herself hadn't even called the police at that point. Likely, nobody had yet contacted the police, and certainly nobody was conducting an investigation. It seems she was certain that she would be asked where she was that day. One can't help but suspect that Jane and Zoran know more than they want to reveal. At the very least, people who definitely knew where Ravel was that evening, apart from her last client, were the escort agency administrator, Jane King, and Zoran Stanovic. The new police investigation leading to the second coroner's inquest, planned for early next year, is in defiance of the apparent difficulties posed by the time elapsed since Ravel Belmane's disappearance. However, it currently promises the greatest hope that this dreadful case will be solved. Today, detectives are closer than ever to capturing her killer. What motive for murder would you consider the most trivial? Betrayal, jealousy, or money? Don't rush to answer. This is a tricky question. After all, a jealous person might turn out to be greedy, and an unfaithful wife may burn with jealousy herself. When in a love triangle each person has their own motive for murder, it won't be easy for the police to figure it out. And then even a killer who no one would dare to call very smart will manage to lead the investigation for 467 days. Growing up in Amarillo, Texas, Robin knew exactly what she wanted in life, even as a child. She wanted to stay at home and take care of her children while her husband provided for the family. Her parents, both military veterans, had a happy marriage that lasted for 40 years, and she dreamed of having a similar relationship. However, things didn't go as planned because she often chose the wrong partners and avoided the good ones as if they were a danger. But above all, Robin feared being alone. She hated being alone, and she was afraid of being alone. Fortunately, thanks to her sociable nature, she got a job as a waitress in a restaurant where there was no shortage of attention from men. And so one evening in 2003, at the age of 22, Robin met a wonderful young man named Jeremy David Spielbauer. Though everyone simply called him JD, 21-year-old JD was gentle, caring, and exceptionally polite. He served in the Marine Corps and had been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. He also found work as a mechanic in civilian life. Needless to say, Robin fell head over heels in love with him. Just 2 months later, she joyfully announced to her parents that she and JD were expecting a child. Her parents had only just learned that she was dating someone, but they chose not to argue. Robin moved into JD's and his mother's house. After the birth of their daughter, they decided to get married. Soon, their second daughter was born. However, as is often the case, financial difficulties made life increasingly challenging for the growing family, and conflicts became inevitable. Then, to the surprise of their friends and family, the family began attending the local church about 3 times a week. There, they made new acquaintances, including a young mother of 2, Katie. The girls quickly became friends, but Robin's friend Aaron House looked with suspicion upon JD's newfound religious devotion. She believed that their church attendance was a more trivial reason, a desire to see Katie more often. Unfortunately, she was right. Robin stubbornly turned a blind eye to everything until the day her husband moved in with his lover. Approximately 8 years into their marriage, Robin filed for divorce and returned to live with her parents. JD and Katie got married on November 10th, the founding day of the Marine Corps. Now, JD helped Katie raise her 2 children, but it was clear that Robin hadn't forgotten her ex-husband until she became interested in Jared. It was evident that the young man genuinely liked Robin, and her friends, especially Aaron, were very happy for her. Robin at last regained her old self, rejoiced, and smiled happily, just like before. It seemed like a happy family and a cozy nest were on the horizon for the girl. But this glimmer of hope quickly dimmed one night in April 2014 when Robin got into her car and drove away, never to return home. On the morning of April 8, 2014, Robin's mother noticed her daughter was missing. She assumed that she had stayed with one of her friends, as she had done in the past, and felt somewhat irritated because she needed to go to work and didn't know who would take her grandchild to school. At that moment, it didn't even occur to her that something might have happened to her daughter. On the same day, around noon, a local businessman was driving on the highway when he turned onto Helium Road, and 3 girls ran towards him shouting, "She's dead! She's dead!" The man contacted the rescue service after the girls told him that they had seen a black Chevrolet Tahoe with a girl lying near the rear wheel. She wasn't breathing and wasn't moving. The officers who arrived at the scene concluded that the poor girl had been there for several hours and had suffered a blow to the head with a blunt object. She had no identification, wallet, or phone with her. However, the license plate of the vehicle helped identify the victim as Robin Spielbauer. Robin's parents had to break the terrible news to her daughters and her ex-husband. JD couldn't believe what had happened and couldn't hold back his tears. He immediately went to the family to support the children and his former in-laws. At the same time, the investigators were examining the crime scene. One unusual detail they noticed was the damage to the car's glass. The rear right door's glass had chips and bright pink paint marks. What did this suggest? It indicated that someone had struck the car's glass with a heavy and pink object. However, the detectives had no idea what significance this discovery would have in their investigation. Therefore, they began questioning Robin's acquaintances. Her boyfriend Jared stated that after work, he went home, played video games, and went to sleep. JD also claimed that he was at home, had 2 glasses of beer, and fell asleep. He hadn't come anywhere near Helium Road that evening and had no idea where Robin might have gone, why, or with whom. However, his phone told a completely different story. According to his text messages, he and his ex-wife were planning to meet that evening. The man had to admit that his wife had gone to her friend's place with their son. He had arranged to meet Robin at his home to discuss their children and wanted his uncle to be there in case his wife returned early. However, he forgot about the meeting and simply fell asleep on the couch after his uncle left. He woke up shortly before 10 p.m. with a strange, oppressive feeling. JD messaged his wife and his uncle, asking if everything was okay. At 10:18, he also messaged Robin, but she didn't respond. He tried calling her, but it went to voicemail. Just a few minutes after JD called his ex-wife, Katie arrived at the house. JD's uncle, who had returned to calm his agitated nephew, confirmed that she arrived around 10:20. They talked for a bit, As JD was still feeling uneasy, the detectives noticed that JD seemed to be trying to hint at something and directly stated that he was raising many suspicions. In response, the man claimed that he had his own suspicions but didn't specify what they were. The investigators had no doubt that JD was hiding something, and as they delved into his life, they discovered what it could be. JD had been married to Robin, but he had an affair with Katie. He then divorced Robin, married Katie, and started a new affair, this time with Robin. JD claimed they maintained friendly relations for the sake of the children, but Katie suspected there was more between him and his ex-wife. JD and Katie argued nearly every day, and Robin found it amusing. She wanted Katie to take her own medicine. The two women fought for a man they both considered a traitor, and what made him worth fighting for remained a mystery. Robin's friend Aaron even recalled an incident in 2013 when Robin came to Katie's house to pick up the girls. Katie grabbed and pushed her down the stairs, climbed on top, and started beating her. Robin managed to push her off. When Aaron heard about this, she warned her friend not to be alone with Katie because she was one of those crazies who could kill her. 5 months after that fight, Robin was dead. The investigators, of course, spoke with Katie. She admitted not liking Robin, but claimed she never threatened her. However, she stumbled on the same issue her husband did, her own text messages, and not just 1 or 2 messages. In the 4 days leading up to the murder, Katie sent her husband 336 angry messages. It was clear that she was furious and struggling to find a way to vent her anger. Less than an hour before the murder, she sent the following message to her husband. "My dreams of a happy family have evaporated. I won't force you to continue bearing this burden. You started it, whether you want to believe it or not. I will end it." Statements like these, in the eyes of the investigators, turned the jealous wife into a murder suspect. However, Katie had not only a motive, but also an alibi. She and her son spent the evening at her friend Savannah Guinness's house. They left around 10 p.m. and returned home at 10:20, which was confirmed by JD and his uncle. Furthermore, there was no evidence connecting her to the crime scene, at least not at that point. On the same day that investigators were interrogating Katie, the forensic expert conducted an autopsy on Robin. At the crime scene, it appeared that she had died from a severe blow to the head with a blunt object, but the autopsy revealed something more. A .22 caliber bullet had been fired into the back of the victim's head. Now the police began searching for the weapon. Robin's parents, who lived just a few houses away from Katie and JD, watched as the police conducted a search in their former son-in-law's home. The family had an entire arsenal in the house, which was quite common for Texas. However, one small detail caught a lot of attention. A pistol with a bright pink frame, the same caliber as the bullet that killed Robin. A piece of plastic had broken off the pistol. Therefore, the investigators returned to the crime scene and combed the area around where they found the car. They discovered a .22 caliber shell casing and 2 bright pink plastic fragments that obviously matched the pistol. What was particularly intriguing was that before they found the weapon, but after the murder, the investigators had browsed Katie's Facebook page and found a photo of her shooting the very same pink pistol. However, before they could realize the significance of this discovery, she deleted the photo. It seemed like Katie didn't want the police to know about the weapon. But why? Detectives took a closer look at where she was at the time of the murder. You may remember she had an alibi. She and her son spent the evening with Savannah's family and left at 10 p.m. However, Savannah told them that Katie and her son had left at 9:50 or around that time. Just 10 minutes, but they were crucial. It only takes from 3 to 5 minutes to drive from Savannah's house to Helium Road. These 10 minutes cast doubt on Katie's alibi, and her best friend was the one who brought it to light. There was more. At 10:13, Katie's phone pinged at a tower that could be considered close to both Savannah's house and the crime scene. This meant that Katie had the means, opportunity, and motive to commit the murder. The police believed they had everything they needed for an arrest. They arrested Katie in front of her 12-year-old son, Diego. By the way, as all witnesses confirmed, Katie was with her son the entire evening. Wouldn't he have noticed if his mother had stopped the car in the middle of a field, had an argument with someone, and then committed a murder? Especially since Robin had not only been shot, but also struck with a blunt object on the head. The teenager surely would have noticed. But when he was questioned, he said that all he remembered was sitting in the car with his mom and playing games on his phone while they drove around the city. Thus, on April 11, 2014, just 4 days after the murder, the investigators informed Robin's parents about the arrest. Robin's loved ones lost a daughter and a friend. But the consolation for them was that the person responsible for her death, Katie Spielbauer, was behind bars. Is the case closed? Not quite. Katie remained in jail, unable to post bail, while investigators and District Attorney James Farron built their case against her. They soon received assistance from an unexpected source. JD came to the police station and stated something he had maintained all along. He had been at home with his uncle when he received a message from Robin proposing a meetup on Helium Road. This time, JD added to his story by saying that just after 9 p.m., Katie returned home. She was in a bad mood and started an argument. JD, not wanting to fight, went to his bedroom and lay down. When he woke up, he found that his wife had left in his car. That was when a terrible feeling of dread overcame him, and he decided to check if everything was all right. JD and his uncle received responses from Katie, confirming everything was fine, but there was no response from Robin. When the detectives asked JD why he decided to tell them about this now, he explained that the thought of his wife being involved in Robin's murder was driving him insane. The investigators challenged JD's story, which contradicted phone records available to the police. JD's phone pinged at 9:23 while he was on his way to the crime scene. JD then explained that someone else had taken his phone and his car. It was Katie. She saw his messages with his lover and took his phone, his car, and went to confront Robin. But why did Katie hit the car's rear right window with a gun? The detectives were convinced that it was likely the lovers had met on Helium Road, sitting in the back seat of the car when Katie arrived. She fired her gun before JD could react, and now he was torn between his loyalty to Katie and his desire for justice for Robin. After a few more days, JD finally agreed to tell everything. JD and Robin had met on Helium Road, sitting in the car and just talking about the kids. When they noticed headlights approaching, they heard a loud knock on the window, obviously not made by a fist. JD opened the door, and it was Katie. The girls immediately started arguing. JD demanded they stop fighting and reassured Katie that they were just talking about the children. He then went to his car and drove home, convinced that Katie would follow him, but he was wrong, so he sent 2 text messages, asking if everything was okay. JD explained that he hadn't told anyone earlier because he didn't want to believe it, as he still loved Katie, but now it was all over. He filed for divorce and never visited his wife in jail, as she was going to be there for a long time unless she could prove her innocence. When investigators took on the case, it seemed simple and straightforward. It took them 4 days to link Katie to the murder. The prosecutor believed that after some time in jail, Katie would confess. However, even her husband's admission didn't help. Katie demanded a polygraph test. The police provided her with that opportunity and she took another one. She failed it miserably, but it didn't break her. She still refused to confess. Katie didn't deny her animosity towards her rival, but claimed she would never kill her or arrange someone else to commit murder. The reason lay in her tragic upbringing. Her father died when she was 2, and she buried her mother at 18. Knowing the hardships of growing up without parents, she would never do such a thing to Robin's children. All the evidence against Katie was circumstantial, and they needed something more solid. That's when a breakthrough happened. In the prosecutor's office, someone mentioned a case where smartphones could leave digital footprints when connecting to Wi-Fi networks. Katie's phone had its Wi-Fi turned off, but her son Diego's phone had it on. This meant that investigators could track Diego's every move and consequently that of his mother that night. Since all the witnesses consistently stated that the teenager was always with his mother, tracing Diego's phone could lead them to Katie. The prosecutor instructed his assistants to obtain this information, and it took months to do so. When the data was finally acquired, the prosecutor met with Katie. By that time, she had spent 467 days in jail awaiting trial. The prosecutor told Katie that he considered this information the final piece needed. He was confident that it would send her to prison for life, but it turned out to be the key to her freedom, allowing her to reunite with her children. She couldn't believe it, breaking down in tears due to the overwhelming emotions. She admitted that during her time in jail, she had harbored the darkest thoughts, fearing that if she were found guilty, she would have to be carried out in a body bag. She would prefer her children to believe their mother had passed away rather than having her incarcerated for murder. Suddenly, with the snap of fingers, she was free. Within hours, the case against her was closed, and she was released. A happy ending? Not quite, as if Katie was innocent. It meant that someone else got away with murder. The prosecutor publicly admitted his mistake. He realized that JD had outsmarted him simply because everyone underestimated him, believing he wasn't clever enough to orchestrate a murder. Although there was a small arsenal in his home, he chose the pink gun, which often jammed after the first shot, solely because it belonged to Katie. He could have disposed of it in the desert where it might never be found, but he brought it back home. Moreover, surveillance cameras captured a car similar to his near the crime scene at approximately the time of the murder. Although the face and license plate weren't visible, investigators were convinced it was JD behind the wheel, and no car remotely resembling Katie's was seen there. But the most significant lie he told was not about the night of the murder, but his past. JD had never served in the Marine Corps or any other military branch, nor had he been to Iraq or Afghanistan. All those stories were fabrications to impress women like Katie, whose parents had military ties, something that spoke volumes about his character. The prosecutor was certain that at some point before Robin's murder, she had told JD that she had met someone else and they would no longer be lovers. Additionally, she had expressed her desire to finally receive full child support payments. JD's scheme was simple: kill Robin to get rid of her, frame Katie to eliminate her as well, and then remain financially stable while finding a younger and more agreeable girlfriend. This would solve all his problems. However, the prosecutor hesitated to press charges, and 9 months later, Robin's mother called him. It turned out JD had asked her to do him a favor and buy him a ticket to New York, claiming he needed to go there for the weekend. Presumably, he planned to flee since it was just a short distance from New York to the Canadian border. This prompted the prosecutor to take action, but an arrest doesn't equal a conviction. That's why he took another unexpected step by inviting Katie as a witness in the case. The prosecutor was confident that his earlier mistake would now help convict JD. Robin was killed with a pink gun, and either JD or Katie had to be the murderer. It was certainly not Katie. The defense argued that if Robin had been severely beaten and then shot, it pointed towards Katie as the perpetrator because both actions could have killed her, suggesting the murderer was in a state of rage. Moreover, JD couldn't have framed Katie easily because he wasn't smart enough for such a plan. If he wanted to frame his wife, he would have ensured that she had no alibi. JD could have been sentenced to death if the jury believed that the crime included a robbery because Robin's phone and wallet went missing, and later, her daughter's documents were found in JD's car. However, the jury decided that this was more likely a theft than a robbery. Therefore, he was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after April 20th, 2046, when he would be 63 years old. Justice was served for Robin, but her parents still felt the pain of the thought that their daughter's greatest fear came true when JD left her alone on that remote road. In January 2020, the case took an unexpected turn. The appellate court overturned JD's conviction. It turned out that 2 jurors had formed opinions about the defendant and the case before the trial, which was not allowed by the procedure. Additionally, JD had complained about the performance of his lawyers. In 2021, the court found no issues with the jury selection process. However, the case was once again sent back to the appellate court to assess JD's complaint about his attorneys. It's important to note that the appellate court did not conclude that the man was innocent, but rather that there was a procedural error. Even if JD's trial is conducted again, Katie, who currently works at a law firm, has promised to be present on behalf of Robin to ensure that justice prevails once more. Katie herself has become the director of a company that helps teenagers and adults overcome emotional and physical traumas and change their lives for the better through sports. The criminal world of Liverpool was seriously shaken. 3 guys broke into a father and son's house and made off with a 30-kilogram stash of prohibited substances. The robbery sent shockwaves through the city's underworld. The gang that owned the stolen batch was once considered untouchable. A secret informant reported that the guys who lost goods worth £1 million were at the top of the city's criminal hierarchy. No one could believe that someone would dare to steal from them. Police managed to crack the case by gaining access to their phones, and in May 2022, some of them found themselves behind bars. However, Liverpool's gangs were still furious and tried to get to anyone they believed was involved in the heist. Rumors circulated that 35-year-old Joseph Nee had been gathering information for them. Joseph Nee had only recently been released from prison, where he served time for drug distribution and robbery. He was granted early release and was required to comply with parole conditions. Nee was part of a gang that trafficked Class A controlled substances into Liverpool, the most dangerous of them all. Joseph wasn't considered the most popular guy even within his criminal circle, and some had even targeted him before because even his own associates viewed him as an informant and a snitch. On August 22, 2022, Joseph and his friends gathered at a mutual acquaintance's house to watch a football match between Liverpool and United. The game ended at 21:52, and shortly after, Joseph left the house with one of his friends, Paul Abraham. Later, Paul would recount that they were simply walking down the street when, at 21:59, they heard 3 loud pops. Of course, they had heard such sounds before and instantly recognized them as gunshots. The men started running. The shooter circled around and began firing at the men from behind at close range. The attacker was very close to his target and, of course, knew how to handle a firearm. As a result, the bullet struck Joseph in the upper abdomen, and he fell immediately. Paul Abraham leaped over his fallen wounded friend and sprinted towards the park gates. It might not have been the noblest behavior towards a friend, but perhaps he knew that it wasn't worth risking his life for Joseph. At that moment, the armed man was in a perfect position, unlike his victim. Joseph lay unarmed, wounded, and defenseless on the ground, while the stranger, dressed in black and wearing a balaclava, confidently approached him, holding a 9mm pistol. Joseph begged for mercy, but the stranger paid no attention to his pleas and coldly squeezed the trigger. The shot could only have been lethal, but obviously the universe was on Joseph's side at that moment. As they say, the gun jammed and it didn't fire. Joseph didn't miss this chance to jump up and, despite his wound, run away. Surprisingly, the shooter was prepared for any turn of events. He calmly retrieved 2 weapons, a revolver, and continued the pursuit, never ceasing to fire. Meanwhile, Joseph was running in the direction of King's Hit Avenue, an ordinary street where ordinary families lived. This was the home of 46-year-old Cheryl Corbell and her 3 children, Chloe, Ryan, and their younger sister, 9-year-old Olivia, who everyone called Liv. Of course, all the residents on the street who were at home heard that there was some commotion outside. Some realized that these were gunshots, while others were puzzled about what was happening. Among them was Cheryl. The woman opened the door and looked out onto the street, as many would have done in her place. However, Joseph noticed the light in the partially open door, and he ran as fast as he could toward Cheryl's house. The woman was horrified to see an injured man approaching her, followed by an armed man in a mask. Quickly assessing the situation and realizing that it was not worth getting involved in the gang's altercation, she rushed back into the house and tried to slam the door. Unfortunately, the dropped latch prevented her from doing so. Joseph, desperate to escape and knowing that his time was running out because his pursuer was about to catch up with him, pounded on the door, begging the homeowner for help. Cheryl had already realized that these were some criminal gang troubles, and being a Liverpool resident, she understood that she and her family would face trouble if she got involved in something like this. So, she ordered the man to leave. She must have felt sorry for the wounded man, but her desire to protect her own children outweighed everything else. However, Joseph had no intention of leaving. He threw himself against the door with all his weight, breaking inside, knowing that this would bring enormous problems to the family. The man burst inside and collapsed on the floor, weakened from the chase and the gunshot wound. But the pursuer didn't back down. He saw Joseph Nee enter the house. Another person might have thought that there would always be another day, another opportunity to reach the target. But the shooter had no intention of giving up. He had a mission to accomplish, regardless of who he harmed. The commotion near the front door of the house, which had now shifted into the hallway, was accompanied by noise. Chloe, Ryan, and Olivia were sleeping, but they woke up due to the loud sounds. Ryan recalls that he was in his room when he heard 3 loud noises followed by quick footsteps. It was his younger sister, Olivia, running downstairs crying out, "Mom, I'm scared!" Ryan also came out of his room but stayed at the top of the stairs, watching in bewilderment as chaos unfolded below. He looked down and wondered who this man lying in the hallway was. He saw his mother trying to close the door, and his younger sister stood just a few steps away from the front door. Olivia wanted to be closer to her mother. She went down to her, crying, "Mom, I'm scared! Mom, I'm scared!" The assailant at this moment could not ignore the child's cries. He knew that Joseph Nee had burst into the home of an ordinary family with no connection to their disputes. He saw Cheryl trying to eject the stranger from the house, saw Joseph attempting to get inside, and heard Olivia's cries. However, none of this mattered to him because he simply started shooting through the gap in the door without thinking about where the bullets might hit. A bullet struck Cheryl, entering her right hand. But even though she was in pain, she continued to battle with the door. Joseph, at this moment, regained his senses to the point where he began to help her. He shouted at her to call the police because the shooter was still trying to force his way in. The shooter managed to push his hand with the revolver through the gap in the door. While Joseph began to plead with him to stop again, Cheryl jammed the door, including his hand with the weapon, before he began shooting once more. A bullet hit the door frame. Finally, the shooter decided he had spent too much time and retreated. Cheryl was able to breathe a sigh of relief, stopped struggling with the door, and rushed to comfort her daughter. She wasn't concerned about her own wound. The most important thing was to hug Olivia and tell her that everything would be okay, that no one would harm her now. Cheryl noticed that there was a lot of blood on Olivia's pajamas and thought that her wound on her arm was bleeding heavily. But then she lifted her daughter's shirt and realized that it wasn't her blood. Olivia had been shot. The same bullet that had injured Cheryl had gone through her right hand and into Olivia's chest. Olivia was gasping for air. Her mother knelt beside her, begging her daughter to stay with her. Ryan, who still hadn't realized that his sister was wounded, began shouting at Joseph to get out, but the uninvited guest had no intention of staying. Joseph managed to make a call and was picked up by his two friends in an SUV. They rushed him to the hospital, not giving a second thought to the condition they left the family members in, whose lives had just been forever changed. They simply abandoned them amidst all the chaos. While Cheryl called for help, she held Olivia in her arms and instructed her son to continuously apply pressure to the wound on Olivia's chest. Only then did the boy realize that his sister was injured. Olivia's lips had turned blue, and the bleeding had stopped. Ryan assisted his mother in carrying Olivia upstairs. They tried to stop the bleeding with towels. A neighbor arrived attempting to offer some assistance. Cheryl desperately tried to keep Olivia conscious. Later, she would tell the police that at some point, Olivia's body went limp and her eyes rolled upwards. It was at that moment that Cheryl realized Olivia had passed away. The police arrived at 10:10 p.m. An officer felt Olivia's faint heartbeat, and they carried her out of the house, rushing her to the nearest children's hospital in an ambulance. They held on to hope, but the doctors were unable to do anything. Olivia was pronounced dead at 11:24 p.m. Cheryl wasn't by her side when she passed, as she was receiving medical attention herself. Just a few hours earlier, it had been a normal, happy family, and now a mother and son were left as witnesses to the death of their 9-year-old daughter and sister. Meanwhile, a man named Thomas Cashman, known as Tommy, dressed in black but without the balaclava, rushed to the home of his former lover with whom he had a very brief affair. He entered her house without permission, scaring her terribly as he entered her bedroom. He was agitated and claimed that someone had tried to kill him, and he wanted to kill that person in return. In other words, he needed her help, and he was willing to say anything to get it. He even stated that she was the only one he could trust, despite having a fiancée with whom he had spent many years. The woman believed Tommy and offered him shelter for the night. However, the next morning, when all the media were buzzing about the shocking crime, she realized that Tommy had been involved in the shootout and was responsible for the death of 9-year-old Olivia Pratt-Corbel. Now, involuntarily, she became an accomplice. The woman was horrified by this prospect. On one hand, she didn't want to cover up a child killer, but on the other hand, any Liverpool resident knows how dangerous it can be to cross paths with criminal gangs. Uncertain about what to do, she called her boyfriend, Paul Russell. Paul arrived and had a private conversation with Tommy. Tommy immediately confessed to Paul that he had been hunting Joseph, but was abruptly cut off by Joseph, who asked him not to say anything about it to avoid implicating him in the crime. It was a very reasonable move on Joseph's part. What remains unclear is why he later made a significant mistake, giving Tommy different clothes, helping him get rid of the items he was wearing, and taking him to where his car was parked. Perhaps Paul understood that Tommy could pose a threat to him or his girlfriend and chose to assist him. But this act of help to a killer will likely have serious consequences for Paul as well. During this period, the investigation into the murder was in progress. Joseph Nee, who had suffered injuries, much like Cheryl and Olivia, declined to cooperate with the police. His primary concern was self-preservation, as the looming threat of returning to prison for violating his parole weighed heavily on him. Despite being involved in the criminal underworld, Joseph should have been able to surmise the identity of his assailant and whose orders the killer was following. Nevertheless, he informed the officers that anyone could have taken a shot at him that night. It's noteworthy that Joseph was not the only one apprehensive about engaging with law enforcement. Olivia had become the third Liverpool resident to succumb to gunshot wounds within a week, not to mention the numerous incidents where victims were shot but survived. In a city aptly nicknamed the British Amsterdam, crossing paths with criminal gangs was indeed perilous. A reward for information on Olivia's assailant had been announced, which quickly swelled to a record-high amount of £200,000, thanks to an anonymous contributor who added £100,000 to the fund. However, despite this substantial incentive, no one came forward with information. Nonetheless, the police succeeded in identifying a suspect, 34-year-old Thomas Cashman. He was a father of two, aged 4 and 14, engaged to a girl he had been dating since their school days. The family resided in a spacious suburban house in West Derby. Tommy had previously worked at a car wash, but his current lifestyle was vastly different. Officially unemployed, he rented a house that, in reality, belonged to the gang's leader. It was evident that his involvement in criminal activities afforded him a lavish life. Fortunately, Liverpool boasted extensive CCTV coverage, making it challenging to perpetrate an attack without being captured on camera. Investigation revealed that at 8:30 p.m., Tommy returned home, swiftly changed into black attire, and left his residence. He didn't make much effort to conceal himself while hunting his target. Surveillance footage documented him passing the house on Finch Lane several times before traversing past it once more. Tommy was convinced that his target was inside that house, having closely monitored his movements. He had even attempted to attack him earlier that day, though that endeavor had failed. When Joseph finally left the house, Tommy was resolute in his intent to eliminate him. However, fate took a different course, and an innocent bystander fell victim to a stray bullet. Such are the consequences when the worlds of ordinary individuals and criminals collide. Tommy's trousers, which he had provided to Paul Russell, were discovered at his sister's residence bearing his DNA. Gunpowder residue was also found on his right leg. Video evidence, DNA profiling, and gunpowder residue collectively linked him to the attack on Joseph. Yet the investigation had another valuable asset: a courageous witness who risked his life to oppose Liverpool's criminal underworld. In the early hours of September 4th, 2022, Tommy was apprehended while hiding at a friend's apartment. In October 2022, Tommy was formally charged with Olivia's murder, the attempted murder of Joseph and Cheryl, as well as possession of a firearm. Paul Russell faced charges of aiding and abetting, despite his earnest efforts to distance himself from the case. The trial of Tommy took place in Manchester in March 2023. Tommy denied all allegations. He claimed he hadn't killed anyone and that he appeared on the video because he was a local drug dealer, making deliveries that day and buying toys for his sick child. He added that he had no intention of killing anyone that day and that he had been friends with Joseph Nee for the past 10 years. However, his words were completely contradicted by a key prosecution witness. The remarkable effect came when Tommy's former girlfriend, who had sheltered him immediately after the crime, appeared in court. It was an incredibly brave move on her part, considering she lived in a city where many of Tommy's friends and gang members resided. Naturally, she would be protected under a witness protection program. As the police stated, she received more threats of violence than any other witness in Merseyside police history. She had to completely abandon her previous life, yet she chose to do the right thing. The witness explained her decision by saying that one should not be afraid to come forward when it involves the murder of a 9-year-old Olivia. The witness described how the accused came to her after the murder, trying to secure her support to create a false alibi. It's unclear why he couldn't ask his own fiancée for this favor. Tommy's defense team attempted to twist her words, suggesting that she wanted to frame her former lover because he refused to leave his fiancée for her. It was an absurd attempt to discredit the witness, and despite their efforts, she remained highly convincing. Following the witness's example, other people also found the courage to approach the police. They revealed that within criminal circles, Tommy was known as a contract killer or a hitman. He had been hired for various murders and was suspected in other homicide cases and assassination attempts, including another attempt on Joseph Nee's life, with the same weapon used to kill Olivia on that fateful day. In fact, the same weapon had been used on January 27, 2020, when a 19-year-old was shot. It was evident that Tommy had hired a criminal cartel to assassinate Joseph Nee. On March 30th, after 3.5 weeks of court proceedings, the jury unanimously found Thomas Cashman guilty on all counts. The sentencing was scheduled for April 3rd. On the same day, Olivia's family intended to address the court, speaking to the murderer and recounting how the crime he committed had affected their entire family. However, Tommy refused to even appear in court on that day. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole at a minimum of 42 years, making him 76 years old upon potential release. The judge commented on her decision, explaining that she would have preferred to sentence him to life without parole. However, she had to acknowledge the fact that Tommy didn't intend to kill Olivia. If he had intended to kill a child, he would have received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It was evident to everyone in court that his target was another criminal. The judge took into consideration that he was also a father and wouldn't be able to see his children as often as he would have liked, but that was solely his own fault. She emphasized that the man's refusal to appear in court was not taken into account. Paul Russell was also found guilty of aiding and abetting and is currently in prison awaiting his sentence. Olivia's mother, Cheryl, had hoped to look the killer in the eyes and express her thoughts about him. However, he deprived her of this opportunity by not appearing in court. Cheryl admits that she didn't know he could simply choose not to come. Therefore, Olivia's family, particularly Cheryl and Olivia's Aunt Antonia, are advocating for changes in the law to require criminals to appear in court during sentencing and meet face-to-face with the victims' families. Since Olivia's murder, not much time has passed, and her mother admits that during these few months, she has been driven to madness by the deafening silence in their home. Olivia, from her childhood, was a chatterbox and giggler. If Olivia had survived in just 5 days, she would have performed a truly noble act. She intended to donate her hair to a charitable organization. She was eager to help an organization that makes wigs for sick children and had decided to cut off a whole 12 inches of her locks. People would have understood what a tremendous gesture it was coming from a 9-year-old girl. Giving a piece of herself to another child who needed it more would have shown just how wonderful Olivia was. The complete opposite of the people who invaded her home that August night in 2022 when Olivia took a bullet meant for a criminal. In memory of Olivia, other children created a beautiful corner in the park where she loved to play. They painted an enormous butterfly on the wall and planted flowers of a beautiful pink color. During Olivia's farewell at the church, hundreds of people gathered. Everything was adorned with pink butterflies. Olivia's mother, Cheryl, bid a moving farewell to her daughter, saying that Liv was loved and adored by everyone who knew her. She will never be forgotten. Cheryl added, "I won't say goodbye, but I'll say goodnight. I love you. We'll see you in the morning." Such a case has never occurred with investigators from South Dakota. There are 3 suspects, the husband, the lover, and the 12-year-old daughter, each with a motive for committing a heinous crime, but only one of them is guilty. Will the detectives be able to uncover the truth, navigating through the depths of anonymous letters, spy devices, and false evidence amidst the ocean of passions that unfolded around what seemed to be an ordinary American family? On the morning of Wednesday, February 8, 2006, Wyoming resident Bonnie Burns was sitting by the phone, eagerly awaiting a call from her daughter, 41-year-old Tammy Rhea, who lived in Pierre, South Dakota. Every morning for many years, Tammy would call Bonnie without fail. The sudden silence from her daughter frightened Bonnie, so she decided to call herself. Tammy's home phone went unanswered, and her mobile phone redirected the call to voicemail. She was also absent from her job in the shoe department at Kmart. Contemplating what to do next, Bonnie recalled the name of one of her daughter's colleagues, Brian. Tammy had recently mentioned to the family that she had been communicating with Brian frequently. Therefore, Bonnie dialed the store number again, this time inquiring if Brian was present. Brian Clark answered Bonnie's call in surprise. He also didn't know where Tammy was. However, in response to Bonnie's desire to contact the police, he asked her to provide him with the details. He dialed 911 and reported that he needed to report a missing person. Brian added that a crime may have occurred. When asked by the dispatcher why he believed so, he replied that he and Tammy were having an affair, and it was evident that her husband had found out about it. When 12-year-old Haley Rhea sat down to have breakfast, she immediately felt that something was off. Her father, Brad Rhea, was also seated at the table, but her mother was nowhere to be found. Tammy always busied herself in the kitchen, but now the house was unusually quiet. Haley walked into her mother's bedroom. All her belongings were still there. Her SUV was parked in the garage. The girl couldn't understand what was happening. Her mother couldn't have left without her purse, phone, or keys. They had spent the evening together, while her father, as usual, worked late, and her mother never once mentioned that she had plans in the morning. Perplexed about where she could be, Haley asked her father. In a hushed voice, Brad replied, "Sweetheart, she's probably with her boyfriend. She'll be back in 2 days." Tammy and Brad met in Billings, Montana. The young couple started dating right away, and within a year, Tammy was expecting a child. It was her dream to get married and become a mother. Tammy took care of Haley and the household while Brad focused on his career. In 2004, Brad's hard work paid off when he was offered a promotion to assistant manager at Walmart, but it required the family to relocate to Pierre. Although it was the administrative center of South Dakota, the town had less than 14,000 residents and lacked any significant entertainment options. One notable attraction in Pierre was the dam and the adjacent lake, a popular spot for fishing and hunting. However, it provided a picturesque and peaceful setting for the family, so Brad accepted the offer. The move from a big city wasn't easy for the family, but after some time, life in the new place began to settle. Hay found a few sports clubs to join, and Tammy found work at a store where she met Brian Clark. Unlike her husband, who loved his wife but couldn't devote enough attention due to work, Brian was always there for her. The news of her mother having a boyfriend came as a thunderbolt out of the blue for Haley. Although her parents had informed her 2 weeks earlier that they had decided to get divorced, this news caught her completely off guard. Her parents had explained to her that her father had been working incredibly long hours, sometimes up to 100 hours a week, and it had taken a toll on their marriage. However, they had promised to stay together until the end of the school year so that the changes wouldn't affect Haley's education. And now, with her father announcing that her mother had a boyfriend, Haley didn't know what to think. After dropping his daughter off at school, Brad headed to work. As soon as he entered, 2 police officers approached him. When Brad heard that his wife had gone missing, he was shocked. He explained that he hadn't seen Tammy since the previous day. When he arrived home from work after 10 p.m., his daughter was already asleep and Tammy wasn't home. Around 1 a.m., Brad heard a car screech to a halt outside. He glanced out the window and saw Tammy park her black SUV, get into another car, and drive away with a man. Brad had recently discovered that his wife was seeing someone else and assumed it was his car. Succumbing to a sudden impulse, he got into Tammy's SUV and followed them, but soon his wife's car broke down and Brad had to pull over on the side of the road. A passing patrol officer stopped to assist Brad. By the time the car started again, he had lost sight of his wife, so he returned home and went to sleep. The next morning, she was still missing, and he assumed she had gone somewhere with the other man. The detectives listened attentively to Brad's account of the events from the previous night. The store manager, a man of small stature and meek appearance, didn't seem like a threatening individual, and his behavior didn't indicate any signs of lying. The police asked if Tammy could have already returned home, and Brad willingly agreed to accompany them. It was a trick. The officers had already been inside the house and one of them noticed something through the garage window that caught his attention. When Brad allowed them to search his home, one officer went inside while the other headed straight to the garage. There, he noticed a reddish-brown stain on Tammy's car door. As he approached, he saw blood dripping from the vehicle's threshold. There was too much of it, and when the police officer opened the door, he was nearly overwhelmed by the powerful smell of bleach. Everything indicated a crime, but the officers didn't want to alarm Brad, who could demand the search to stop at any moment. The police decided to employ another trick. They asked Brad to drive with them to the station to answer some questions. And while the owner was not at home, they would request an official search warrant. Simultaneously, during the questioning of Brad, the police spoke with Haley. The girl shared that her parents never argued and her father devoted every spare moment to the family. That's why the news of their divorce was such a surprise. Haley noticed that the impending divorce had also taken a toll on her father. He had been very moody in recent days, hardly eating anything, and he had called Tammy, pleading for her help in saving their marriage. Meanwhile, Haley's mother had behaved as usual. Tammy told her family that the house would stay with her and Haley, and Brad would move out. The family confirmed the girl's words. Tammy was looking forward to the divorce. She informed her relatives that the house would remain with her and Haley, and Brad would relocate. At the police station, Brad cooperated fully, answering all the questions. His wife had recently confessed to him that she had fallen in love with someone else and wanted a divorce, but Brad didn't know who the other person was. He adamantly denied any involvement in Tammy's disappearance and insisted that he had no idea where she might be. When the detectives informed him about the blood found on the car, he was shocked. While Brad was being questioned, the police obtained a search warrant for his home and thoroughly examined every room, but everything seemed completely normal except for the blood in Tammy's car. It was a cozy home of an ordinary family. The amount of blood found in Tammy's SUV indicated that she had suffered serious harm and was likely killed. In such a case, Brad was the most likely suspect, given his wife's desire for a divorce, which provided a motive. They interrogated him for 5 hours until he insisted on having a lawyer. Although they weren't 100% certain that Tammy had been killed, they couldn't release the suspect either, as he could potentially destroy any evidence. The police had no choice but to arrest Brad on the first-degree murder charge. While Brad Rea was under arrest, the investigators invited Brian Clark to the police station. He arrived with his lawyer. Just like Tammy, Brian also had a family, a wife and a daughter. Brian told the detectives that he had last seen Tammy the day before her disappearance. They met at a motel, and then Brian dropped Tammy off at her home around 5 p.m. afterward. He went to a basketball game with his wife and daughter. He spent the entire evening and the night at home. Brian mentioned that his wife could confirm his alibi, but she was unaware of his affair with Tammy, and he preferred it to stay that way. Once again, the detectives didn't know what to think. The man genuinely seemed concerned about Tammy, but the fact that he immediately appeared with a lawyer raised suspicions. Additionally, the fact that Brian's wife was unaware of her husband's infidelity provided him with a motive for murder. Perhaps, if Tammy had confessed to Brian, she demanded that her lover do the same, urging him to get a divorce or even threatening to talk to Brian's wife, pushing him over the edge. Access to Tammy's SUV was in the hands of her husband, but if his story about surveilling his wife was true, Brian could have killed Tammy and doused the car in blood to frame her husband. The police tracked down the patrol officer who had stopped to help Brad start his car, and he confirmed Brad's account word for word. Now, the police had confirmation of the story he had consistently repeated. So, who was the killer if the murder indeed took place? No matter how you look at it, without a body, the case couldn't progress any further. On February 9th, search teams began combing the extensive area around the city, where rarely anyone could be found except for hunters who frequented the hilly shores from October to January. If Tammy was here, it was unlikely that anyone would stumble upon her before the start of the next hunting season, 8 months later. By that time, wild animals would most likely have discovered her remains first. The teams covered kilometer after kilometer, but the woman was nowhere to be found. As the sun approached the horizon, the helicopter pilot decided to fly over the isolated plain, approximately 16 kilometers north of the city, one more time. While flying over the marshland near the dam, he spotted Tammy Rea's lifeless body. As it turned out, the woman had been stabbed at least 35 times. It felt as if the killer had unleashed immense fury upon her. It was an extremely brutal murder, but there was no blood around the body, indicating that the attack had taken place elsewhere. The officers found a t-shirt and 2 blood-stained gloves, but there was nothing that could provide clues to the identity of the killer. Neither the autopsy nor another search of the family's home yielded any results. The investigators had no choice but to interrogate Brian's wife. It presented an excellent opportunity for the betrayed woman to seek revenge, but she didn't take advantage of it. She confirmed that her husband was at home on the night of February 7th. However, despite the couple sleeping in the same bedroom, the woman suffered from back pain and often spent the night downstairs in a reclining chair. That was the case on the night of Tammy's murder. Therefore, Brian could have slipped out of the house in the middle of the night without his wife knowing. Once again, the investigation reached a dead end. Suddenly, the case took a completely unexpected turn. A letter was delivered to the office of the district attorney. It was written by one of Brian Clark's cousins. The man could no longer stay silent and wanted to unburden himself. According to the letter, Brian confessed that on Tuesday, February 7th, he met with Tammy at the motel and they agreed to meet again later. Brian arrived at Tammy's house late at night. They took 2 blankets and set off in Tammy's SUV out of town. After spreading the blankets, Tammy undressed, leaving only her t-shirt, and asked Brian to wear a condom, but he refused. Tammy's persistence infuriated him. He attacked her, and they struggled for some time before Brian forcefully got what he wanted. However, during the assault, the condom remained inside Tammy's body. In a fit of rage, Brian grabbed a knife and attacked Tammy. After killing her, he wrapped her body in the blankets and placed it in the SUV. He then returned home and parked the car in the garage. Brian had to share everything with his brother, who helped him get rid of the evidence. Many of the facts listed in the letter were not known to the public. The anonymous author could only have learned them from the killer. But there was one hitch. The initial autopsy did not reveal any condom. To uncover the truth, another autopsy was conducted. Incredibly, upon re-examining the body, the pathologist discovered this crucial piece of evidence that had somehow been missed the first time. The discovery promised to provide the much-awaited clue that the investigators were hoping for. However, due to the time the condom had spent inside Tammy's body, the DNA sample could not be used for comparison. What seemed like a promising piece of evidence raised even more questions. Whoever wrote the letter undoubtedly knew all the information about the murder, but there was still no physical evidence proving that Brian was the killer. Now the investigators understood what Brad was talking about during his initial interrogation. Even when it was unknown whether Tammy was killed, he had said, "All this evidence points to me, but I hope there will be a body because there will be something that will exonerate me. Maybe DNA, something like that." Brad could only hope for such evidence if he himself planted it in an attempt to frame Brian. The question was, how did he obtain Brian's DNA? The investigators talked to Brian and learned that he often disposed of used condoms by throwing them out of the car window. It turned out that Brad had followed multiple lovers before. By tracking them, he discovered Brian's habit, which allowed him to devise a cunning plan to frame his rival. Of course, Brad couldn't have known that DNA would not be suitable for analysis if it remained in another person's body for a long time. The biggest problem remained that the investigators still didn't know where the murder took place. The police returned to the family's house for another search, hoping to find the slightest clue. In Brad's closet, an officer found something intriguing, a tiny digital recorder. When the detectives pressed the playback button, Tammy's voice filled the room. She asked to call Brian Clark. They spoke for a few minutes, and then Tammy said, "I love you very, very much." Since the beginning of the investigation, Brad had claimed that he didn't know who Tammy was seeing. But on the recording, Brian's name was clearly heard. Brad had set a trap to find out who his wife was meeting. He had placed the recorder in her car, along with a bouquet and a note. As Brad had hoped, Tammy assumed the flowers were from her lover and called Brian to thank him. inadvertently revealing his identity. Now the police wanted to know what else Brad might have been lying about and how he managed to send an anonymous letter while being in prison. Brad regularly communicated with his twin brother, Brett Rhea. When Brett was released from prison after a visit to his brother, the police were already following him. Upon his arrest, they discovered a very interesting notepad in his possession. It listed all the facts that later appeared in the anonymous letter. Additionally, they found a letter from Brad describing excellent fishing spots. He drew a map indicating several locations near the dam. Considering the murder charges against him, it was unlikely that he would be thinking about something as trivial as fishing. The marked locations were significant for another reason. Following the instructions, the officers found 3 large black garbage bags containing blood-soaked beddings. The bags also contained blood-stained rubber gloves, women's underwear, and a large tarp. The tarp explained why there was no trace of blood in the Rhea family's house. Here's how events likely unfolded on that night. Brad had prearranged the tarp on Tammy's mattress and placed several sheets over it to ensure she wouldn't notice anything. When she lay down on the bed on the night of February 7th, Brad entered the room and attacked her, stabbing her multiple times through the sheets and slashing her throat. The bedding immediately absorbed all the blood. Brad then carried Tammy's wrapped body, along with the sheets, to the garage, located right next to her bedroom. He placed her body in the car, planted the evidence, and loaded her body and the bags of bedding. As for Brad's story about breaking down on the road and interacting with the patrol officer, he was likely on the verge of getting caught. He was heading to Brian's house, intending to plant some evidence, confident that the condom would lead investigators to his rival. And when he realized that he wasn't discovered during the autopsy, he had to devise a plan involving the letter with a false confession and seek his brother's help to send it. The trial began in January 2007. Since the prosecutor did not seek the death penalty for Brad, in the event of a guilty verdict under South Dakota law, he would automatically receive a life sentence. The prosecutor expected the process to be brief and clear-cut, but Brad made the rare decision for a defendant to testify in his own defense. No one could have anticipated what he would say when he took the witness stand. Unable to hide the lie any longer, Brad felt that he had to confess everything. It was not him who killed Tammy, but his now 13-year-old daughter, Haley. Problems started after Haley was informed that her parents were getting divorced. She was furious because her parents didn't want to reconcile and spent whole days in a saddened state. On the night of February 7th, Brad returned late from work, and his wife and daughter were already asleep. He also went to bed but was awakened by the cat around midnight. Brad heard some noise coming from Tammy's room and went to check what was happening. To his horror, he saw Haley standing over her mother's body. She was covered in blood and holding a knife. There was blood coming from her nose, indicating that Tammy must have fought back. Brad shouted, asking Haley what she had done, but she stood motionless and didn't respond. Brad attempted to help his wife but realized it was futile. His daughter continued to stand there, showing no emotions. It was only then that Brad realized she was asleep. In panic, he took the girl back to her room and wiped off all the blood. He then tried to clean the crime scene. He put the clothes in the washing machine and took his wife to the car. To protect his daughter, he decided to frame a man whom Tammy had seen. When Haley woke up the next day, she behaved completely normally, and Brad realized that she didn't remember anything that had happened. Initially, he wanted to escape to Mexico with his daughter, but he was arrested before he could do so. Brad explained that his daughter always had behavioral problems and had even stabbed her stuffed toys when she was a little child. He admitted that he had broken the law and deserved punishment, but only for trying to protect his child. The prosecutor was pleased that Brad provided testimony because attempting to accuse his daughter would have enraged the jury members. In reality, the evidence indicated that the wounds on Tammy's body could not have been inflicted by a 12-year-old girl, even considering that she was a fairly strong volleyball player. During the cross-examination, the defendant couldn't explain facts that had already been reliably established. Moreover, Brad's twin brother had already confessed to everything. It took the jury 3 hours to deliver a guilty verdict. Nevertheless, Brad Rea insists on his story. He unsuccessfully filed an appeal, claiming that he was framed by investigators and that his daughter's DNA was never compared to the DNA at the crime scene. The most terrifying part is that if a condom with Brian Clark's DNA had been found during the initial autopsy, this case could have ended completely differently. The fact that the intended evidence was not found compelled Brad to bury himself deeper, acting out of desperation. Haley Rea lost both of her parents on the day her father decided to kill her mother. She moved to live with relatives in Wyoming and never saw Brad again. Fortunately, she didn't allow the incident to break her. The immense love that surrounded her mother became a source of motivation for the girl. Speaking out on public platforms, she became the voice of domestic violence victims who can no longer stand up for themselves. Haley pursued an education in criminal law, got married, became a mother, and only regrets that her son will never know what a wonderful, kind, and loving person his grandmother was. On Thursday, July 19, 1990, residents of Florida, Steve and Jane McGowan, received a letter from their 34-year-old sister, Beverly. She bid them farewell and wrote that she was embarking on a journey to find herself in this world. Beverly added that she was quitting her job and selling her apartment because she intended to leave immediately. The contents of the letter deeply shocked the brother and sister. Beverly had worked hard and was satisfied with both her job and her new home. She had recently acquired the apartment she had dreamed of and worked 2 jobs to pay off the mortgage. Jane hurried to the police station to report her sister's disappearance, but the authorities could do little since the letters stated that Beverly had left of her own accord. The letters were written in Beverly's handwriting on notepad sheets found at her home. So Steve and Jane went home to Beverly in Pompano Beach to try and find answers to their questions. They immediately noticed that Beverly's red Volkswagen Fox was not in its usual parking spot. Beverly herself was not in the apartment, but it did not give the impression that she had packed up and left for good. There were dirty dishes in the sink, a nightshirt lay on the unmade bed, and clothes hung in the closet. However, there were also signs that Beverly had no intention of returning. The phone was disconnected, the answering machine was missing, and there was no sign of her 2 cats. Steve and Jane rummaged through drawers and discovered that Beverly's passport, birth certificate, and address book were also missing. Beverly worked in the loan department of a bank and had a part-time job at a non-profit organization. Steve contacted the bank to see if her colleagues could shed light on the situation. They informed him that the day before he received the farewell letter, Beverly had taken a sick day, citing illness. This was unusual considering Beverly's reputation as a responsible and reliable employee. During the phone call, she also mentioned that she no longer wanted to live in her apartment and asked them to sell the mortgaged property and get rid of her personal belongings left in the apartment. Beverly was asked to send a telegram confirming her request, and such a telegram was indeed received. Although the circumstances were strange, Steve and Jane had to believe that their sister had truly left without explaining herself to anyone. However, Steve managed to convince the police to file a missing person report and he closed Beverly's credit cards. He reasoned that closing the cards would disrupt her travel plans and anger her enough to compel her to contact the family. On the same evening that Steve and Jane were inspecting their sister's apartment, a fisherman and his young niece went to search for bait for an upcoming fishing trip. They arrived at a wide irrigation canal located 160 kilometers north of Pompano Beach in a remote area of St. Lucie County. Leaving his niece in the car, the fisherman began walking along the canal when he noticed something that appeared to be a bag of trash. As he approached closer and realized what it was, he hurried back to the car and contacted the police. Deputies from the St. Lucie County Sheriff's Office, who arrived at the location indicated by the fisherman, discovered the body of a woman. It was evident that the perpetrator not only took her life, but also made every effort to prevent her from being identified. However, he overlooked something. On the woman's right ankle, hidden beneath her jeans, there was a small tattoo of a yellow rose. The description of the tattoo was released to the media in the hopes that local residents could identify it. Steve McGowan had already returned home when the phone rang around 10 p.m. It was a friend of his missing sister. She had just heard the news about the discovery in the St. Lucie Canal and the matching tattoo that Beverly had. The next day, Steve and Jane went to St. Lucie to speak with investigators and show them a photograph of their sister's tattoo. Due to the condition of the body, traditional identification methods had to be ruled out, but both of them were confident that it was their Beverly. Dental records comparison confirmed that it was indeed her. The inspection of Beverly's apartment did not reveal any blood or suspicious items. There were no signs of a struggle. Steve and Jane couldn't understand who would harm their sister. She loved her family, especially her nephews, and they loved her. Beverly was not wealthy and was not involved in complicated relationships. Her life was overshadowed by the fact that her two boyfriends died in separate car accidents. However, despite her past, Steve was confident that Beverly had been quite content with her life recently. Although Beverly worked 2 jobs, it was not enough to cover her mortgage payments. To increase her income, she started renting out one of the bedrooms in her apartment. During the search of her apartment, investigators found a notebook with a list of potential tenants. Each entry included the full name, phone number, and the scheduled time for viewing the apartment. Except for one. The first line only had the name Alice and was marked for Tuesday at 6:30. After meeting Alice, Beverly spoke highly of her. The woman had come from London, dressed impeccably, drove an impressive car, and worked for the renowned company IBM. Alice had moved to the region because she was temporarily transferred to the company's office in Fort Lauderdale. She had impressed Beverly to the point that she chose her as the new neighbor and informed her friend that Alice would be moving in on Friday, July 20th. By the way, Beverly mentioned that Alice introduced her to numerology. Alice attempted to predict Beverly's future, but she needed various numbers that held significance in Beverly's life, such as her date of birth, passport number, social security number, and even details from her driver's license. Strangely enough, Beverly provided her with all of these numbers. Overall, she was satisfied with Alice's predictions about her future and shared them with her friends. Unfortunately, she did not share the last name of her new neighbor with them. Alice's identity remained a mystery. Additionally, there was no evidence to suggest that Alice had moved in or even visited Beverly's apartment. The investigators reached out to IBM, where they were informed that they had no employees from the UK working in the South Florida area. They didn't even have an office in Fort Lauderdale. The investigation into Beverly's finances revealed that on the day her body was found, someone withdrew $795 out of the $800 that was in her bank account. Her credit card was then used to purchase women's clothing and books at a shopping center in Miami. The salespeople who served the customer described her as a bright blonde with a British accent. The description matched that of a tall blonde woman who had attracted nationwide attention at the time. 8 years earlier, in 1992, police officer Lori Bembinek had been sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her ex-husband's former wife. The case had caused a sensation. Lori's glamorous appearance combined with the high-profile nature of the case made her somewhat of a celebrity. A few days before Beverly's murder, Lori had escaped from prison in Wisconsin. When the Miami salesperson was shown photographs of Lori Bembinek, they recognized her as the woman who had used Beverly's credit card. The police were puzzled as to how the convicted killer's path could have crossed with that of a modest bank employee until it was discovered that Lori had actually fled to Canada and was not in Florida at the time of the crime. However, on Friday, July 20th, one day after Beverly's body was discovered, her card was used again in Miami, this time at a travel agency. The card holder had a notable appearance. It appeared to be a man dressed as a woman. The person wore a cheap black wig in the style of Cleopatra and oval-shaped glasses. The man spoke with a British accent and introduced himself as Sam. Apparently, Sam was planning to fly to London in 2 days, on July 22nd, and used the card to purchase a ticket for British Airways Flight 92. Detectives examined the passenger registration records for Flight 292, as well as all other flights heading to Britain on July 22nd. Beverly McGowan's name was not on any of them. However, Beverly's car was found in the airport parking lot, where it had been parked for 5 days. Fingerprints found inside the car yielded no significant results, but 4 synthetic black wig hairs were discovered. British Airways Flight 292 arrived at Heathrow Airport on Monday, July 23rd, according to London time. After landing, a passenger with short black hair and oval glasses approached the Avis car rental counter. The passenger, presumably Sam, booked a car in Beverly McGowan's name and handed over her driver's license as proof. Beverly had shoulder-length dark hair and wore glasses. The person at the counter resembled her. The clerk asked for a credit card to pay for the car's fuel, and Sam handed over Beverly's Visa card, but the card was declined. Sam explained that they might have exceeded the limit and paid in cash. In reality, by that time, Beverly's brother Steve had cancelled her credit cards. When Florida detectives learned about this unsuccessful transaction, Sam had long disappeared. Since the credit card was no longer active, its transactions could not be traced. Sam's arrival in Britain meant that he was beyond the jurisdiction of American law enforcement agencies. Florida detectives contacted the London police to request their assistance. Detective John Cornish agreed to help with the international investigation. He spoke with the Avis company and instructed their staff to direct the suspect to their nearest office if he contacted them. Later that same week, Sam did contact Avis. He requested an extension on the car rental, and he was asked to visit the nearby Avis office. The police waited for him at the location, but Sam never showed up. A backup plan was devised, where officers would wait at Heathrow Airport on the day of the car's return. That day arrived, but Sam once again failed to appear. In the early morning hours, Sam's abandoned car was found a few miles from the airport, devoid of any clues. Suspecting that Sam might be attempting to fly back to the United States, Detective Cornish ordered his team to board all flights heading to the US on that day to check the passengers, but this endeavor proved futile. The police missed the opportunity to apprehend the criminal. The only lead the police had left was British Airways Flight 292. Since Sam didn't use Beverly's passport to board the flight, it meant he had booked a ticket under a different name. Investigators attempted to examine the 248 passengers on that flight, but by law, they were not allowed to check passengers who didn't reside in Florida. Therefore, they sought assistance from the U.S. State Department in Washington, D.C. Each passenger's name had to be compared with passport details, and since there was no unified database that consolidated all this information, the process could take years. It wasn't until January 1996 that the State Department provided the police with a name they deemed important. Sylvia Ann Hodgkinson, a British citizen, was on Flight 292. The photo in her passport depicted a woman with dark hair and eyebrows. After her husband's death, she was forced to move into a women's shelter if she had nowhere else to go. Less than a year after her husband's death, a passport was issued in her name. Investigators suspected that someone else had impersonated Sylvia to obtain documents in her name. Since they couldn't locate Sylvia in any way, there was concern that she had suffered a fate similar to Beverly's. The State Department also discovered an intriguing connection between Sylvia and 2 other women, Charlotte Ray Cowan and Elaine Antoinette Parent. All 3 identities turned out to be inadvertently linked after an incident that occurred a year after Beverly's murder. On May 22, 1991, North Miami police approached a woman in a rented car. The car had been rented 6 months earlier in Los Angeles and was overdue for return. Stolen license plates were attached to the car to conceal its origin. Inside the car sat a tall, red-haired woman who identified herself as Charlotte Ray Cowan and presented her documents to the officers. It was clear that Charlotte had been staying in the car with 2 dogs. Several wigs, the woman's personal diary, and a number of documents with Charlotte's photograph but different names, Sylvia Hodgkinson and Elaine Parent, were found in the car. The police arrested Charlotte based on her failure to return the rented car. She spent a night in jail and posted bail the next day. Remarkably, despite the woman's obvious use of false identities, the police took no action regarding this matter. On the day of Charlotte's court hearing for the offense, one of the arresting officers was present in the building. When it was time for Charlotte to appear before the court, a redhead woman stood up. However, the officer who had arrested Charlotte was shocked. The woman summoned to court by the subpoena was not the same woman he had taken into custody. Charlotte herself couldn't understand why she had suddenly received a court summons. She asked the officer if the woman he had arrested was tall and a redhead. When he answered yes, she confidently stated that she knew exactly who it was. Nearly 10 years earlier, in the mid-80s, Charlotte was relaxing at a bar in Orlando when an elegantly dressed woman with a British accent approached her. She had short red hair, like Charlotte, and amazing blue eyes. The woman introduced herself as Anne Trumont and offered to buy Charlotte a drink. Charlotte accepted the offer, and they engaged in casual conversation. During their chat, Anne casually brought up the topic of numerology. She mentioned that she would be happy to create a corresponding matrix for Charlotte and started by asking for her date of birth. One by one, Anne extracted Charlotte's social security number and driver's license details. She jotted everything down on a napkin and gave Charlotte a positive prediction about her future. Anne and Charlotte became instant friends and started communicating. A few days later, Charlotte met Anne's brother, a tall blonde man with the same elegant demeanor as his sister. However, over time, the women saw less of each other until they completely lost touch. So Charlotte was quite surprised when, several months later, Anne called her and said that her aunt had passed away, leaving her a significant inheritance. Anne was supposed to share the money with her brother but claimed that he had decided to have her institutionalized to claim all the money for himself. About a month after the phone call, Anne appeared on Charlotte's doorstep at 3 a.m. She had a mustache, wig, and a man's shirt with a tie. Sobbing, she explained that she had escaped from the institution where her brother had placed her. She was hiding from her family and needed help to disappear. Anne begged Charlotte to allow her to take her birth certificate so that she could create a new identity for herself. Initially, Charlotte refused, but she reluctantly agreed when she saw how distraught Anne was. Her friend promised to return the birth certificate soon. Weeks passed, and Charlotte heard nothing from Anne. She began to worry. Then, finally, she received a letter with the birth certificate and a note from Anne, apologizing for the delay. Charlotte didn't hear anything more about her friend until the moment she received a court summons in 1991. Hearing this fascinating story, the investigators became intrigued by the identity of the elusive and enigmatic fraudster, Elaine Parent. Like others, Parent was a real person, but little was known about her life. She was born in the Bronx, New York, on August 4, 1942. She was the only child of loving and fairly affluent parents. By the time she reached adulthood, she had transformed into a tall, slender beauty with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. At the age of 30, she moved to Florida and worked for a while at a real estate agency until her arrest in 1976 in Fort Lauderdale for shoplifting. Her fingerprints were taken and stored in the database. Then, in 1985, she stole jewelry worth $40,000 from an elderly acquaintance. This was around the same time Parent met Charlotte. Parent's fingerprints were compared to those of the woman arrested in 1991 for failing to return a rented car. They matched. The woman masquerading as Charlotte Coven was Elaine Parent. Naturally, the conclusion was drawn that the new neighbor, Beverly McGowan Ellis, the elusive suspect Sam, and Elaine Parent were one and the same person. However, they still needed to directly link Elaine to Beverly's murder. The detectives reviewed the evidence in the case and examined a notebook containing letters Beverly had written to her brother and sister using an electrostatic detection device, ESDA. This specialized equipment is used to detect indentations or impressions on paper left by previously written letters. The analysis of the notebook revealed that it had been used for a series of other letters written not in Beverly's handwriting. It seemed the author was a woman who held a strong grudge against Beverly. The messages were rather aggressive and contained threats. The letters were compared to handwriting samples from Elaine Parent, and they matched. The letters written by Parent were addressed to a woman in London who held a high-ranking position as the CEO of a major company. For her safety in the case materials, she was referred to as Witness X. She shed light on many gaps in the life of the elusive fraudster. The woman revealed that she had met Elaine during a trip to Miami in the 1980s, and they quickly became friends. In 1985, when the police were searching for Elaine for the jewelry theft, she apparently fled to London and asked Witness X if she could stay with her. However, the two young women soon realized that they couldn't live together due to Elaine's explosive temperament and instability. In 1990, the con artist returned to the United States, but to Witness X's surprise, she returned to London at the end of July. She was driving a car rented from Ives. 3 months after her return to London, Parent stole 2 dogs belonging to her former friend and escaped to the United States. From there, she sent threatening letters to Witness X and attempted to extort a ransom for her dogs. These dogs were evidently the same ones found in her possession during her arrest in Miami in 1991. By the end of 1996, Parent faced charges of passport forgery from the State Department, but they have no idea where she could be hiding. In 1998, the television show America's Most Wanted aired an episode about Elaine Parent. When the show began, Patricia Nevins from St. Petersburg, Florida, was at home watching television. As soon as she saw Elaine's photo, she immediately recognized her. Patricia Nevins was a church worker and knew Elaine as a blonde named Sandra Little. Patricia met Sandra Little in 1992 when she was living in a homeless shelter in St. Petersburg. Patricia allowed Sandra to stay in her vacant bedroom, and she remained with her for almost 1.5 years. During this period, Sandra filed a lawsuit against a restaurant where she slipped and injured herself. She won the case and received compensation, the amount of which is undisclosed. Patricia described several curious incidents that occurred while she lived with Elaine. Elaine once told her that one way for her to lead a dignified life was to assume a different identity. Then, during a dinner party, Parent mimed cutting a guest's hand to steal a gold bracelet. Patricia arranged for Elaine to speak with a psychiatrist, who later informed Patricia that Elaine was an extremely intelligent sociopath who would leave Patricia's life as quickly as she entered it. This prediction came true when the women went their separate ways in 1993. After the police publicly appealed to the community to help capture Elaine, an intriguing letter was delivered to the office of the St. Lucie County Sheriff. Inside was a copy of a painting done in oil colors. It depicted Elaine Parent wearing a teal-green swimsuit and pearl earrings. Her hair was gray and styled in the same manner Parent often chose. She was portrayed coming out of a pool. On the back, it was printed, "Best wishes, your chameleon." Psychiatrist Barbara Cavan, who had been assisting the police in the case, stated that Parent both desperately needed and feared police attention. The painting is very telling. She sent it to the police to taunt them, as if to say, "I'm alive, I'm okay, look for me, but you'll never find me." In February 1999, Elaine was featured in the documentary series World's Most Wanted, which brought her international attention. Reports poured in from around the world claiming to have seen Parent in Turkey, France, Australia, and South Africa. The press dubbed her the most wanted woman in the world. In April 2002, America's Most Wanted aired another episode about Elaine Parent. Following the program, numerous calls came in from the affluent neighborhood of Panama City, Florida, claiming that a woman living there was Elaine. 3 police officers were dispatched to the address. They arrived at a modest single-story house and knocked on the door. A middle-aged brunette woman, dressed in a beige silk pajama set, answered the door. The officers explained why they had come to see her. The woman introduced herself as Darlene Thompson and presented them with her military ID, which featured her photograph. She did not resemble the photograph of Elaine Parent that the officers had seen. Realizing that the neighbors had made a mistake, the officers nevertheless asked her to accompany them to the station for formalities. Darlene agreed and requested that the officers wait while she changed clothes. While the officers waited outside the bedroom, one of them examined Darlene's ID. Being a former military personnel, he immediately noticed a crucial missing stamp that confirmed the document's authenticity. The officer knocked on the bedroom door to clarify this matter, to which she responded that she was getting dressed. The officers waited for her to come out, but she never appeared. A gunshot rang out, and the officers rushed into the bedroom only to find Darlene dead. Subsequent fingerprint analysis officially confirmed that Darlene and Elaine Parent were the same person. It turned out that the house where Elaine lived belonged to another woman. Elaine had been renting a room from her since August 2001. The homeowner described her as a pleasant woman with a passion for cooking. During the search of the house, Elaine's Florida driver's license was found, featuring her photo but under the name of the woman she was staying with. In a notebook, she had written down information about a man from the neighboring town of Lynn Haven, including his social security number and credit cards. Elaine's closet was filled with wigs and both women's and men's clothing. A book on learning the French language and another on theatrical makeup were also discovered. Some acquaintances of Elaine mentioned that she often worked on a laptop, but it was never found. The diary she had with her when she was arrested over 10 years ago as Charlotte Cavan was also missing. Another intriguing detail to the portrait emerged. The police found a flyer with a photograph of Elaine and the name Antonia Racemen. The flyer stated that she was being sought by the FBI for the murder of a government official at a hotel in Washington. Interestingly, it appeared that Elaine had created the flyer herself, and the local police chief later speculated that she had made it to intimidate someone. The death of Elaine left many unanswered questions. The police believe she had up to 20 different identities that she used across the world, including the USA, UK, Turkey, Israel, France, and South Africa. Some suspect that she may have committed more murders, but no additional victims have been found. 3 years prior to her death, investigator Norma Pfeiffer told the media, "The brutality of the Maguire murder makes me think that someone capable of this has either done it before or will do it again." Opinions are divided as to whether she worked alone or had an accomplice. Some argued that she couldn't have managed Beverly on her own. And let's not forget about the attractive blonde man she presented as her brother. Psychologist Barbara Kerwin described Elaine as a virtuoso in her field, capable of effortlessly reading people's souls and uncovering their vulnerable spots. However, the motive behind her crimes remains completely unclear. Why would someone with Elaine's high intellect choose to engage in criminal activities instead of achieving great heights in any other field, especially considering that her crimes brought her more infamy than wealth? But Kerwin believes she knows the reason behind Elaine's schemes. She was driven by her own psychological demons, Barbara stated. "I believe she impulsively stole the identities of others to fill her own emptiness." It all started right where it ended, at St. Malachy's Church in Tyrone, Northern Ireland. In December 2010, beauty queen and teacher Michaela Hart and sports star John McCrime tied the knot, sharing their celebration with over 300 guests. However, just 3 weeks later, John returned with the body of his young wife, who was buried in her pristine wedding gown. What led to Michaela's death? Who could be so heartless and calculated as to take the life of a woman who had just begun to enjoy married life with her beloved? And will the collaborative efforts of multiple countries help uncover one of the most memorable and harrowing crimes of recent years? The captain of the Irish football team, John McCrime, and the daughter of one of the country's top football managers, Michaela Hart, met at university in 2005. It was love at first sight, and since then, the young couple had never been apart. During a vacation in Paris, John proposed to Michaela, and she happily accepted. They planned their wedding for New Year's Eve, on Michaela's 27th birthday. After the ceremonial wedding, the newlyweds boarded a plane, embarking on their 3-week honeymoon. They spent the first week in Dubai before the most anticipated part of their trip began, 2 weeks at the 5-star Legends Hotel, located in the fishing village of Grand Gauba on the northeast coast of Mauritius. Michaela chose Mauritius as their paradise island for the dreamy honeymoon and carefully researched local hotels. They settled on Legends Hotel due to its numerous positive reviews and popularity among tourists from Ireland. Upon arrival at the hotel, they asked the receptionist if they could be allocated one of their best rooms. They were informed that there was a vacant room in the luxury block, room 1025. January 10, 2011, after having breakfast together, John decided to play golf while Michaela sunbathed. They met again for lunch. Michaela always enjoyed having tea with something delicious after lunch. She asked her husband to order tea while she went to the room to get Kit Kat bars with her favorite dark chocolate, which she had brought from Dubai and kept in the refrigerator. John offered to bring the treats for her, but it was only 150 steps from the restaurant to the room, so she went by herself. John took some photos and watched videos while waiting for his wife to return. After some time, he began to wonder why Michaela hadn't come back yet. He decided to look for her. Knocking on the door, John received no response. Since he had forgotten his key in the room, he peeked through the window but couldn't see anything, so he went to the receptionist. The corridor attendant led him back to the room and opened the door with his key. However, as soon as the corridor attendant took a few steps away from the door, he heard the cries of a man asking for immediate help. Upon entering the room, John discovered his wife in the bathtub filled with cold water. Bruises were visible on her neck, her skin was icy to the touch, and her lips had turned blue. Assuming that Michaela had intended to take a bath due to back pain but slipped or lost consciousness, John attempted to help her. However, his efforts were in vain. Within an hour, medical professionals pronounced Michaela's death, bringing an end to the dreams of a young and happy married couple. Presumably, due to the initial assumption of an unfortunate accident, nobody attempted to secure the crime scene, and people constantly entered and exited the newlyweds' room. The police were initially informed that a tourist had drowned, but upon entering the room and observing the state of Michaela's body and the disorder in the room, they suspected a murder had taken place. The distraught husband was taken to the police station and held for questioning for 5 hours. This was not unusual since most murders are committed by individuals close to the victims. What was abnormal in John's case was the cruelty and inappropriateness of the statements made by the police officers. Naturally, John couldn't hide his tears over the loss of Michaela. Just half an hour earlier, he had seen his wife happily walking towards their room, but now he discovered her lifeless body in the bathtub. However, upon seeing his tears, a police officer, perhaps trying to console him, said, "Why are you crying? You're still young. You'll find yourself a new wife." It is unknown how long they would have kept John at the station if it hadn't been for the hotel manager's intervention. The manager informed the police that the door of room 1025 had been opened with a stolen master key that fit all the locks. It became evident that the murder had been committed by someone from the hotel staff. It was likely an unintentional murder. Someone among the staff, possibly a security guard with access to the master key, entered the room at 2:42 p.m. 2 minutes later, Michaela opened her own door. The thief, possibly hiding in a small niche in the bathroom, had to quickly consider his options due to the unexpected presence of the maid. If his duties involved room cleaning, he could have simply smiled at Michaela, pretended to do his job, and nothing would have happened because it's a common situation in a hotel. However, if he was a security guard, he knew that his presence in the room would not be easily explainable. So, the only option he saw for himself was to hide in the bathroom and hope that the woman would simply leave. But that didn't happen. As investigators speculated, Michaela decided to take advantage of the opportunity and entered the bathroom. Inside, she encountered the thief. Michaela got scared and ran, and the thief, in panic, attacked her. Realizing that he had killed Michaela, he placed her in the bathtub. Perhaps he tried to create the appearance of an accidental incident with the maid. Despite the shock, he may have also thought that water would wash away any DNA evidence left on his victim. When John got up from the table at 3:05 p.m. and went to check why his wife was taking so long, the killer was still in the room. If John had his keycard with him, he could have caught the killer at the scene of the crime. However, by the time he went to the administrator, asked for the door to be opened, and entered the room, it was already 3:26 p.m., and the thief, unintentionally turned murderer, had vanished. Releasing John put the police under immense pressure. When a tourist is killed in a country that heavily relies on tourism, it becomes crucial to quickly solve the case. It seemed like the case would be solved promptly because the local police chief stated that the island had a 100% homicide clearance rate. One might think he was just acknowledging the efforts of his subordinates, but any professional would be suspicious considering that in 2011, besides Michaela, 30 other people were killed on the island, and all cases, except Michaela's, were solved based on confessions from suspects. The following year, the police once again solved all cases based on confessions. The fact that the police excessively relied on instinct and intuition, if it can be called that, could have been compensated by the fact that the investigators had an ideal crime scene. The hotel room was clean every day. Each entry into the room was recorded by the security system. Surveillance cameras were placed everywhere, and the hotel itself was practically an impregnable fortress, with vigilant security guards everywhere. As it will become clear shortly, that was not the case at all. Within 2 days of the murder, the police arrested several hotel employees, and 2 of them, Avinash Tribhuwoon and Sandeep Mania, were charged with the murder while the others reluctantly became key prosecution witnesses. A week later, a hotel security guard named Dasan Narayanan was also arrested. Dasan was on duty on the day of the murder. His exact location at the time of the crime could not be confirmed, but his fingerprints were found on a fake key that the thieves used to replace the stolen universal key in the security room. Dasan couldn't provide a satisfactory explanation for how his DNA ended up on the safe door in the room. He admitted to touching Michaela's cheek when he rushed to help John, offering an explanation in advance for how his DNA could be present if it was found. However, despite Dasan's conflicting statements, the police decided to charge him only with being an accomplice to the thefts, focusing their main efforts on Avinash and Sandeep. On May 22, 2012, the trial began. The prosecution built its case primarily on the confession obtained by the police, following their customary practice. Prosecutors argued that when Michaela returned to the room on that day, she caught Avinash and Sandeep stealing money from the safe or her purse. Since hotel employees are often the main breadwinners for their families, not just immediate relatives, the thieves preferred to silence Michaela to avoid losing their jobs. During the trial, their colleague Raj Thikoy also testified. He was initially arrested but became the key prosecution witness and received immunity. Raj stated that he was near the room and heard the agonized cries of a woman but didn't knock on the door. Instead, he hid and saw the agitated and sweaty Avinash and Sandeep leave the newlyweds' room. Later, he asked what had happened, and they replied, "Nothing happened, just keep quiet. If you say anything, we'll involve you in this matter." In addition to witness testimonies, the prosecutors largely relied on the confession obtained from one of the suspects, Avinash Tribhuwoon, following the customary police practices. Despite the fact that Sandeep and Avinash were the accused, it created an impression that the police themselves were being judged alongside them as they conducted a careless investigation. The defense attorneys drew attention to all the evident gaps, inaccuracies, and blatant errors made by the investigators. Firstly, after the discovery of Michaela's body, the hotel was not sealed off, and not a single guest or staff member was interviewed. Some tests were not conducted, while others were only performed after the hotel room was returned to the hotel's control, compromising the evidence. Fingerprints and palm prints were found in the room, but their owners were not identified. However, no DNA evidence indicating the guilt of Sandeep and Avinash was found. Even the paper currency, which according to the prosecutors interested the thieves, was not fingerprinted or examined for DNA. The court also heard that all the crime scene photographs were taken in black and white, and many important items were not photographed at all. But the biggest uproar was caused by the mystery of the 46 surveillance cameras capturing the events inside and around the hotel. Despite numerous requests, the police did not hand over the video recordings to the defense attorneys. It turned out that they did not withhold the footage because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. 90% of the videos were erased by the police officers who were unable to operate the cameras. When asked to demonstrate how the equipment works, instead of honestly answering yes, they simply pressed the button. It happened to be the record button, and when they thought they were playing back the recordings, they were actually erasing them. The glaring incompetence of the police made international media wonder if the local authorities were deliberately sabotaging the investigation. Finally, the accused claims that they only made confessions after being subjected to torture by the police. Dasan Narayanan, who allegedly gave Sandeep the key card, claimed that he was forced to make the confession under threat of a weapon. Avinash also denied his statements, stating that the police tortured him and interrogated him with water, after which he vomited blood. Furthermore, he was allegedly told that his wife would be deported and he would be forced to live in Ireland with John McCrime, who would now need a new spouse. Avinash stated that he didn't even read his own confession because he simply signed the document that was presented to him. Another witness stated that he was forced to give false testimony, even though he and Sandeep were actually in room 1009 at the time of the murder, where a VIP client was supposed to stay, and Sandeep insisted on his subordinate maintaining perfect cleanliness in the room. At one point, he even grabbed the mop himself and demonstrated how the floors should be cleaned. Additionally, Sandeep claimed that he was on the phone with his sister in Britain at the time of the crime, which was corroborated by telecommunications data. Finally, the preserved surveillance camera footage also confirmed that he was in a different part of the hotel at the time of the murder. Overall, the court proceedings, which were expected to last for 2 weeks, dragged on for almost 8 weeks. This was largely due to the defense attorneys crossing the boundaries of decorum and turning the trial into a show. They constantly made jokes and elicited bursts of laughter among the bored onlookers and law students present in the courtroom. The defense raised the issue of there potentially being a sexual motive for the crime, hinting at the involvement of Michaela's husband. They referred to an intimate aid they found in the hotel room and insinuated possible misconduct between John and his wife. However, it turned out to be a simple insert from a women's magazine, Cosmopolitan, which Michaela had purchased at the airport. They then attempted to prove that John and Michaela had a severe argument, presenting a video that allegedly confirmed this. However, the individuals in the video were not Michaela and John, but rather 2 people resembling them from Germany. As a result, John had to contact this man on Facebook and request him to provide a statement at a police station in Germany, confirming that he was the one in the video. Overall, Michaela's family was incredibly distressed by the sensationalism surrounding the case of her murder. In particular, a local newspaper conducted a survey titled "Who Killed Michaela?" and John ended up ranking high on the list of the readers' votes. Additionally, the Mauritian newspaper published by the police the photos of Michaela's naked and bruised body, causing indescribable anguish to her family. Nevertheless, these 8 weeks came to an end, and it was time for the jury members to make their decision. The judge summarized the case, clearly pointing out the guilt of the suspects, leading Michaela's family to believe that it would give the accused the right to demand a review of the case after a guilty verdict. They had no doubt that the verdict would be exactly as they anticipated. Furthermore, the judge strongly advised the jury not to consider the impact this case would have on the country's image, but to make the right decision from their perspective. And after 2 months of trial, deliberating for only 2 hours, the jury declared Avinash and Sandeep innocent. After the acquittal verdict, John and Michaela's families were incredibly disappointed. They endured all the agony of the process, inappropriate remarks from attorneys and police, tolerated laughter in the courtroom, and even faced aggressive behavior from the locals because they were confident that the guilty parties would be punished for the murder. They were certain of Avinash and Sandeep's guilt and believed that they were acquitted because the case received global media attention, and the jurors did not want the murder case to reflect negatively on Mauritius' image. The Hart and McCavery families cannot forget that Avinash's lawyer appeared on a local radio station and essentially admitted his client's guilt, mentioning how Avinash cried and apologized to Michaela's family. The interview was supposed to be presented in court, but the lawyer managed to evade his responsibilities. John believes that Avinash told the truth when he confessed to Michaela's murder, and here's why. When anyone hears about death by strangulation, they imagine the killer choking the victim, gripping their neck with 2 hands. But Avinash recounted that when they were in the honeymoon suite, Michaela walked in and saw him holding a wallet. She asked what he was doing. She couldn't have known that Sandeep was in the bathroom. When the girl tried to prevent Avinash from leaving the room, standing in his way, Sandeep approached her from behind and wrapped one hand around her neck. The thing is, the autopsy report was compiled much later, and it confirmed that everything happened exactly as Avinash described. How could Avinash have invented such a method of strangulation if he didn't know it for sure? Additionally, Avinash mentioned that Michaela hit her head on the floor when she fell. The bruise on the back of her head, found during the autopsy, confirmed that as well. Furthermore, in summarizing the case, the judge reminded everyone that Avinash made his confession on January 12th and signed it on the 13th in the presence of his lawyer. If the police wanted to fabricate the confession, they would have forced Avinash to sign something else on the 12th. Moreover, the boy was examined by 3 doctors on different days, and none of them found any signs of torture on him. After the acquittal verdict, a new investigation was initiated. The police focused on a crucial piece of evidence, the keycard that the thief and murderer used to enter the room. However, even the mechanism of these locks cannot be trusted. The locks are not synchronized, and each of the 240 locks in the Legends Hotel shows its own time on the security systems panel, making it impossible to determine the exact time when the killer entered Michaela's room. As a result, the alibi of practically any suspect is in question because the exact time of the crime is unknown. To make matters worse, another significant loophole was found in the hotel's guest security. This loophole could increase the number of potential suspects from dozens to hundreds. If the hotel owns the guest rooms, restaurants, bars, golf courses, and similar areas, the beach is considered public property. According to Mauritian law, the island's beaches belong to the local residents, and fishermen and traders have always had full access to both the beach and the hotel's premises. Local traders sell their crafts to tourists, and young boys are accustomed to spending time on the hotel's grounds. In other words, despite the cameras, gates, and security personnel, the hotel is unable to provide complete protection of its premises, and there is no way to verify who had access to the honeymoon suite. As a result, the new investigation into the case also ended up with no significant breakthroughs. Under international pressure, the Mauritian police revisited Michaela's murder multiple times and even enlisted the services of a French laboratory for retesting DNA samples. In 2014, there was information about a breakthrough in the case when DNA found on Michaela's clothing matched the DNA of one of the suspects. However, this discovery was insufficient to warrant a new trial. In 2017, in an attempt to draw attention back to the case, John announced a substantial reward for information about the case. A few weeks after his return home, he received a call from a lawyer informing him that the arrests of Sandeep and Avinash were now inevitable. The lawyer did not specify the new evidence that made this possible, but Michaela's family felt relieved and believed that they would finally achieve justice. However, weeks and months passed, and no one was arrested. The case was officially closed in 2020, but in 2021, under pressure from Irish politicians, the Mauritian government agreed to reopen the case. The problem lies in the fact that the willingness to re-examine the case does not guarantee that it will be solved. Investigating any murder after 10 years is challenging, let alone considering the possibility that officials in Mauritius may lack the desire to find the killers. Over the course of 10 years, many investigators have climbed the career ladder, and if something is revealed in the case that many would prefer to bury, heads will roll. After the trial, John and Michaela's family filed a lawsuit against the hotel for €1.6 million. They settled the case out of court, and the details of the agreement are not disclosed, but the money went to a foundation established in Michaela's honor. Legends Hotel was renamed Lux Hotel and continues to enjoy immense popularity, as does Room 1025, which underwent renovations and was assigned the new number 1026. John, who now works as an accountant, met a pleasant girl named Cara Brennan at a memorial dinner for Michaela in 2013. Tara, also an accountant, received a marriage proposal from John in 2015. Last year, the couple welcomed their first child, James McCavery.